Chapter 630. Dozens of breaths later. Qin Feiyang came to a giant mountain. The mountain was about 5,000 to 6,000 feet tall, and was the tallest mountain within a few miles. He flew to the top of the mountain and stood at the edge, overlooking the front. There was a vast plain in front of him. There were no trees on the plain, but there were weeds everywhere. Boom! Crack! The deafening sound of battle was heard continuously, like thunder. The sound came from the center of the plain. There was a fierce battle going on there at the moment. It was a man and a woman fighting, but because they were too far away, their faces could not be seen clearly. However, that man had a head of long red hair. He should be Wan Chou. A few hundred meters away from the battlefield, there were 4 figures standing side by side, watching the battle at the moment. The 4 of them were Feng Hua, Feng Wuxie, and the twin sisters. Qin Feiyang looked for a while and then looked away. Because it was too blurry, he could not see anything at all. It was better to find Fatso and the others first. Soon, he found Fatso and the others on a small hill not far away. Whoosh! Qin Feiyang leaped onto the roof and vaulted over the wall. Soon, he arrived at the foot of the mountain. In another dozen breaths, he arrived at where Fatso and the others were. Who is it? Fatso immediately sensed someone approaching and turned his head. But when he saw Qin Feiyang, his expression suddenly froze. Why are there 2 bosses? Dong Xingyang and Wolf King knew in their hearts and were not surprised at all. However, the Black Dragon Snake and King Crocodile were also looking at the 2 Qin Feiyang in surprise like Fatso. Dong Xingyang was about to explain, but Qin Feiyang waved his hand and looked at Fatso. You have been with me for 5 to 6 years, so you should know me well. Now, who is the real Qin Feiyang? Fatso stared blankly at Qin Feiyang and Dong Xingyang from head to toe. The 2 of them had the same face, the same height, and the same clothes on their bodies. For a moment, he really couldn't guess who was the real one. No, a person's appearance could be changed, but it was not so easy to hide one's eyes and nature. Thinking of this, Fatso observed carefully, especially the look in the eyes of Qin Feiyang and Dong Xingyang. A moment later, he pointed at Dong Xingyang and said, "You're a fake." Dong Xingyang's expression stiffened. Frowning, he asked, "How do you know?" Because Boss's eyes carry the vicissitudes of life as if he has seen through everything in the world. But in your eyes, Fat Lord doesn't notice this. If Fat Lord is right, you should be Dong Xingyang. Fatso chuckled. Dong Xingyang was stunned. Not only could he tell that he was a fake, but he could also directly determine his identity. How did Fatso do it? Could it be that he had a pair of fiery eyes? Dong Xingyang asked curiously, "How did you know that I'm Dong Xingyang?" Fatso said with a sinister smile, "It's your eyes. To be honest, your eyes are very special. There's a trace of darkness in your indifference. This means that your heart is not pure, right? Your heart is not pure." Dong Xingyang's face twitched. Although he was not a good person, he was at least a reasonable person who knew right from wrong. Was it as bad as Fatso said? Rolling his eyes at Fatso, Dong Xingyang took a facial restoration pill and quickly restored his true appearance. "It's really you. Fatso was just joking just now. Don't take it seriously. Actually, your heart is not impure. It's just a little, yes, dirty, that's all." Fatso laughed sinisterly. "Get lost." Dong Xingyang's veins were bulging. It seemed dirty, but it was more unbearable than impure. The most outrageous thing was that he said that was all. Wasn't this an insult to his character? I was joking. Fat Lord swears in the name of Boss that he has no ill intentions. "Brother Dong, please don't be angry," Fatso said with an apologetic smile. "In my name?" Qin Feiyang's face darkened. Dong Xingyang was even more furious. When did he become a brother? Top quality. The 2 shook their heads. The helplessness in their hearts could only turn into silent sighs. Qin Feiyang collected his thoughts and walked to Fatso's side. He looked at the battlefield in the center of the plain and asked, "How's the battle going?" Dong Jingyang said in a deep voice, "That woman is very powerful. Even Wan Qiu was suppressed by her." What? Qin Feiyang's eyes trembled. Standing at this position, he could clearly see the woman's true appearance. This woman was around 175 meters tall and wore a white dress. Her figure was very good, and she was curvy where she should be, but her appearance was very ordinary. She was the kind of woman who wouldn't even look at her if she passed by. However, her temperament was outstanding. Her skin was also very soft. On the clothes on her chest, there was indeed the word Feng embroidered. And after Qin Feiyang's observation, Wan Qiu was indeed being suppressed by this woman. Suddenly, Qin Feiyang frowned and shook his head. "Something's wrong." "What's wrong?" Fatso and the others were bewildered. Qin Feiyang asked, "That woman's cultivation, is she a 3-star war master?" "That's right." Fatso nodded. "She is a 3-star war master, and Wan Qiu is also a 3-star war master. Furthermore, Wan Qiu has grasped a perfect support-type battle art. How could she be a match for Wan Qiu?" Qin Feiyang said. Fatso and Dong Jingyang looked at each other. That's right. What was going on? It didn't make sense. Qin Feiyang pondered for a moment and said, "Where did Wan Qiu suffer a loss just now?" Battle art. In the beginning they were evenly matched, but when they used their battle arts, Wan Qiu gradually fell into a disadvantage. According to my observation, if he didn't have a perfect support-type battle art, Wan Qiu would have already lost the ability to resist. Wolf King said with a trace of seriousness in his eyes. Battle art. Qin Feiyang lowered his head and fell into deep thought. Is this the strength of the number 1 person in Yuzhou? But suddenly, a crisp and pleasant voice rang out. Qin Feiyang looked up and saw that the woman had stopped and was looking at Wan Qiu with a trace of mockery in her black, gem-like eyes. Moreover, after such a long battle, there wasn't even a speck of dust on her body. Her white dress was as white as snow. But Wan Qiu, on the other hand, was in a very sorry state. Not only were his clothes tattered, but his body was also covered in wounds and blood. Hearing the woman's words, Wan Qiu's eyebrows furrowed, and he said in a low voice, "If I remember correctly, this is the first time I've met you. But why did you call me by name?" "Call me by name?" Qin Feiyang was stunned and looked at Wolf King and Fatso in confusion. Wolf King said, "When this woman stopped Wan Qiu, she did call Wan Qiu by name, but she never said the reason." That was strange. Wan Qiu was with Feng Hua and the others. Why didn't she call Feng Hua and the others, but only Wan Qiu? Qin Feiyang looked up at the woman again, waiting for her answer. At the same time, Feng Hua and the others who were standing at the edge of the battlefield also wanted to know the reason. But the woman didn't answer and just looked at Wan Qiu. But for some reason, there was a trace of anger in her eyes. "I don't like you." After a long time, the woman finally said the reason. But this reason made everyone's jaws drop. She attacked Wan Qiu because she didn't like him. Wasn't this woman too unique? Qin Feiyang couldn't help laughing. This woman was a bit interesting. However, Wan Qiu was burning with anger. He thought that this woman might have some hatred for him, but he didn't expect that it was because of such a ridiculous reason. She had gone too far. Most importantly, the number 1 person in Yuzhou was defeated by a woman, which made him feel ashamed. Boom! Wan Qiu's body shook and a monstrous aura burst out. Then, he raised his arm and pointed his index finger in the air. His eyes burst with a shocking light, and he shouted, "Blood Soul Palm!" Suddenly, a blood-red light spurted out from his fingertips, and a huge bloody palm appeared out of thin air in an instant. It's coming. This is Wan Qiu's strongest battle skill. That little girl definitely knows how to use a battle art. Quickly, watch carefully. Wolf King reminded Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang glanced at the blood soul palm. Then his eyes firmly locked on the woman, looking forward to it. Still not giving up? The woman frowned, looking a little impatient. Who do you think you are? You think you can make me give up with your little ability? I'm telling you, today either you die or I die. Wan Qiu smiled coldly. The bloody giant hand above suddenly broke through the air, exuding an unparalleled murderous aura. Even the void here was dyed blood red. Ignorant. Seeing this, the woman shook her head and gently waved her hand. Rays of sword qi surged out and hovered around her. Her long hair and clothes fluttered in the wind. At this time, she was like a sharp blade, exuding a shocking sharpness. Condense. With a low shout, the sword qi around her surged into the sky and condensed into a 3-foot-long sword, shining with a dazzling light. That terrifying sharpness could topple mountains and overturn seas, tearing the earth apart. Sacred sword judgment. The woman looked straight at Wan Qiu, her eyes shining with a terrifying light. She pressed her finger down, and the 3-foot-long thin sword cut through the sky, carrying thousands of rays of sword qi, and slashed at the bloody giant hand. Boom! The two collided. In the end, under Qin Feiyang's astonished gaze, the battle sword effortlessly cut the blood-colored giant hand into 2 halves, and then it quickly dissipated. This is... Qin Feiyang's eyes trembled, and his face was full of disbelief. What is this? Wolf King, Fatso, Dong Zhenyang, Black Dragon Snake, and King Crocodile looked at him in surprise. A perfect battle technique. Qin Feiyang said word by word. What? Fatso and the others were shocked. What was going on? Were perfect battle techniques really rampant? Qin Feiyang looked at the woman in disbelief. Before entering the netherworld, he thought that only he, Fatso, Wolf King, and Lu Hong had perfect battle techniques in the 9 prefectures. He never expected that not only Wan Qiu of Yuzhou, but also the people of Fengzhou had perfect battle techniques. It seemed that winning the battle of the 9 prefectures was more difficult than he thought. Qin Feiyang turned his gaze and looked at Wan Qiu. Wan Qiu was half kneeling on the ground, clutching his chest with both hands. Blood kept coming out of his mouth, and his hair was disheveled. Obviously, the previous collision had caused fatal injuries to him. However, Chapter 631. Wolf King laughed sinisterly. Wan Qiu has already gone crazy. I'm afraid he's going to activate his battle soul. Qin Feiyang said, when he activates his battle soul, you can find a chance to take it away from him. Do I need you to tell me that? Wolf King rolled his eyes at him. In this 9 provinces Great War, Wan Qiu could be considered a peak expert with his strength. If his battle soul was taken away, then even if he was a 3-star war master and had a perfect support-type battle art, he would not be a threat. Boom! Wan Qiu waved his hand, and a bloody light flowed up like a tide, condensing into a sea of blood above his head, emitting a monstrous, baleful aura. What kind of battle soul is this? Wolf King was bewildered. Other than the sea of blood, he did not see anything else. Could it be that Wan Qiu's battle soul was this sea of blood? Fatso said, this is not a battle soul, it's his battle art. Roar! As soon as he finished, a beast-like roar sounded from the sea of blood. Following closely, a huge creature roared out from the sea of blood. It was a huge beast. Its entire body seemed to be made of rocks, and it was dozens of feet tall. It was like a towering mountain, lying horizontally in the sky. Its entire body was filled with a ruthless and bloody aura. Fatso explained, this battle art is called the Hellstone Beast. When we went ashore, Fat Lord used this battle art when he fought with him. Its lethality is not bad. Roar! The Hellstone Beast roared and swooped down towards the woman. However, the woman's expression was still calm, as if she did not care at all. The Hellstone Beast arrived in an instant, its baleful aura overflowing. Clang! It was also at this moment the woman suddenly attacked. With a wave of her jade-like hand, sword chi surged and a thin sword instantly condensed. Soul-shattering sword. Next, the woman grabbed the sword hilt and slashed at the air. With a wail, the Hellstone beast was cut in half. Damn! Fatso's pupils constricted. This is also a perfect battle art. Qin Feiyang's eyes trembled. This woman actually possessed two perfect slaughter battle arts. It was too inconceivable, too inconceivable. Wolf King said, Wan Qiu will only have a chance of winning if he activates his battle soul. Maybe even if he activates his battle soul, he still won't be a match for that little girl. The strength that the woman had displayed was something that even it was wary of. True enough, Wan Qiu had activated his battle soul. Voila! Waves of bloody light surged out from Wan Qiu's back and gathered in the air, forming a surging sea of blood. Hell Demon God, following his furious roar, the sea of blood swiftly gathered and formed 100 jong tall crimson figure. The blood shadow was in the shape of a human, but it did not have a face. Its body was only an outline, but it was like a true demon that had broken through the world, emitting a monstrous, demonic aura. Qin Feiyang frowned as he looked at the Wolf King and said, His fighting soul seems to be somewhat similar to yours. Are you blind? Other than the fact that it doesn't have a face, what do you think is similar? The Wolf King rolled his eyes and continued, But this kind of fighting soul is usually very heaven-defying. What do you mean? Qin Feiyang and the others looked at it suspiciously. I've studied it for a long time and finally came to a conclusion. The reason why my battle soul can't manifest its true body is because I'm not strong enough. I think Wan Qiu's battle soul is the same. Wolf King said. Qin Feiyang and the others narrowed their eyes. Clang! There was a deafening explosion. Soon after, Qin Feiyang and the others sensed an earth-shattering sharpness, surging toward them with earth-shattering momentum. They looked up and saw a flash of sword light rushing out from behind the woman. In the flash of sword light, there was a pocket-sized sword the size of a thumb. It was crystal clear, as if it was carved out of crystal. Is this her battle soul? Qin Feiyang and the others were stunned. No matter how they looked at it, this pocket-sized sword could not be compared to Wan Qiu's battle soul. Boom! However, to their surprise, when the two battle souls collided, Wan Qiu's battle soul was directly suppressed by the pocket-sized sword. Dong Jingyang sighed. This woman is powerful. Wolf King said, Little Qin Zi, she will definitely become a strong opponent. Should we kill them together? Before Qin Feiyang could speak, Fatso said, Nonsense, of course we have to kill them. Brother Wolf, take away their battle souls. Anyone who entered the 9th level of the underworld had only one purpose, to enter the imperial capital. In order to enter the imperial capital, whether it was people from the other major states or their fellow disciples, they were all enemies. Wait a little longer. Qin Feiyang transmitted his voice. Now was not the best time to make a move. In the sky above the plain, due to the fierce collision of the two battle souls, a terrifying destructive force was born. The ground trembled, cracked, and collapsed. After a few breaths, Wan Qiu's battle soul was finally defeated and showed signs of collapsing. This was absolutely not allowed, because once the battle soul disintegrated, it would definitely cause fatal damage to Wan Qiu. Innate divine power, Demon God's hand. His face was ferocious as he roared into the sky. The Demon God of Hell, standing in the sky, suddenly stretched out his giant hand and slapped at the pocket-sized sword. Demonic power surged and shook all directions. At the same time, the giant hand released an invisible force that surged toward the woman. The moment the invisible force enveloped the woman, her expression changed. Qin Feiyang was surprised. One had to know that from the beginning to the end, this woman had been calm and collected, but now her face had changed. What had happened? Fatso said in a deep voice, The battle chi in her body has been sealed. Qin Feiyang was stunned and frowned. What do you mean? Wan Qiu's battle soul's innate divine power has a terrifying power. Anyone who is hit by it will have their battle qi and sea of qi sealed and unable to use it. When Fat Lord fought with him, he did not know beforehand and almost suffered a huge loss. Fatso said, "What? Isn't this similar to the effect of the divine gravity metal?" Dong Zhenyang exclaimed. Fatso nodded. Qin Feiyang asked, "Then how can we break his innate divine power?" If she could not use battle qi, she could not perform battle arts. In other words, even if the woman had perfect battle arts, she could not use them now. There's only one way: destroy his battle soul. Although his innate divine power is terrifying, it has a flaw. It can only seal battle qi, not battle soul. However, you have to have a stronger battle soul than him. Otherwise, all your methods will be in vain. Fatso said. Wolf King said, "If that's the case, that little girl's battle soul should be able to do it." Who knows? Fatso shrugged. He had personally experienced Wan Qiu's strength, and it was not something ordinary people could compare to. As for that woman, he had not fought her personally, so he could not say for sure. In the blink of an eye, the giant hand of the demon god of hell had already landed above the woman's head. The terrifying demonic power caused the ground here to sink continuously. The woman raised her head and looked at the falling giant hand, her pupils constricting. But suddenly, she retracted her gaze and looked at Wan Qiu, saying, "You're not bad. No wonder you dare to attack the people of the spiritual state," repeatedly. Wan Qiu grinned sinisterly. "Since you mention the spiritual state, let me tell you. Soon, your Feng state will be the next spiritual state." "Is that so? But why do I see that your Yu state and Kong state are fleeing from Qin Feiyang of the spiritual state?" The woman smiled mockingly. At the mention of Qin Feiyang's name, Wan Qiu's eyes burst with intense hatred. Feng Hua, Feng Wuxia, and the twin sisters were also furious. Dong Zhenyang smiled. "It seems that they are very dissatisfied with you." "Yes. Why am I always the one who gets hurt?" Qin Feiyang sighed helplessly. Suddenly he thought of someone. Lu Xingchen. Lu Xingchen left before him. But why wasn't he here yet? Was he plotting something in secret? Just as he was deep in thought, the woman on the battlefield made her move. She waved her hand and shouted, "Innate divine power, sword realm!" Although the battle aura in her body was sealed, her body was not. Clang! As soon as she said that, the pocket-sized sword in the sky suddenly trembled and emitted a dazzling light. Immediately after, wisps of sword energy appeared and shot out in all directions. In just an instant, a sword qi barrier that was hundreds of meters wide appeared out of nowhere, trapping Wan Qiu and the hell demon god inside. "Is there a point to this?" Wan Qiu sneered. "You'll know soon enough whether it's meaningful or not." The woman glanced at him indifferently and looked into the void. Her eyes gradually turned sharp. Clang! Suddenly, it turned out that countless battle swords had appeared in the empty void. Each of the swords was 3 feet long and 3 fingers wide. They seemed to be made of cold iron and exuded a sharp aura that could destroy the world. Whoosh! Immediately after, the sea of battle swords turned into streams of light and met the gigantic hand of the demon of hell. Boom! The two collided like comets and shook the world. In terms of power, the battle swords could not compare to the gigantic hand. However, there were many battle swords, and they were endless. In less than 5 breaths, with a loud bang, the gigantic hand disintegrated. Immediately after, the densely packed battle swords swarmed towards Wan Qiu's war soul, the demon of hell. Boom! The demon of hell disintegrated in less than 5 breaths. Wan Qiu's body trembled, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were filled with disbelief. What he found most unacceptable was that not a single battle sword in the sword realm was missing. The power of each of these battle swords is comparable to a perfect grade battle art. Even if they shatter, they will reappear with a thought from me. You can understand it this way. As long as the sword realm is not broken and the sword soul is not destroyed, the battle swords will be endless. This is my innate ability, the sword realm. How does it feel? The woman stood proudly on the ground and looked at Wan Qiu indifferently. That contemptuous gaze and cold and arrogant attitude caused Wan Qiu to be infuriated to the extreme, and he roared, "Then I'll blast apart the sword domain, shatter the sword soul, and make you die a graveless death." Boom! He was completely mad. 2 streams of battle, qi, poured out of his body like torrents. 1 stream of battle qi blasted towards the barrier of the sword realm. The other stream of battle qi blasted towards the small sword floating in the middle of the sword realm. Give up. In here, all attacks are futile unless you have absolute strength. The woman shook her head. The battle swords floating in the air moved together and lunged towards the 2 streams of battle qi. In the end, before the 2 streams of battle qi could get close to the small sword and the barrier of the sword realm, they were completely destroyed. Damn, isn't this little girl a little too fierce? Seeing this scene, Wolf King's eyes almost popped out. Qin Feiyang and the others were also dumbfounded. They had always thought that the Serene Prefecture and Kong Prefecture were their biggest threat. Chapter 632. The woman's strength not only shocked Qin Feiyang and the others, but also shocked Feng Wuxie and the other 3 from the Kong state. After being with Wan Qiu for so long, they knew Wan Qiu's strength better than anyone else. Although he wasn't an invincible king, he was one of the top masters in the 9 states tournament. But in front of this woman, he couldn't resist at all. She was ridiculously strong. Seeing that Wan Qiu was in danger, Feng's heart sank and said, "Don't just stand there, go save him." Save him? Feng Wuxie froze and shook his head. Go if you want, I don't want to get burned. What a joke. Even Wan Qiu, who had a perfect auxiliary battle art, was no match for this woman, let alone him, a 2-star combat grandmaster. Going there would be humiliating himself. Feng Hu frowned and said, "Don't forget we have an alliance." Feng Wuxie said, "An alliance depends on the cost." The meaning was obvious. Wan Qiu was the only one left in the Yuzhou state, and Wan Qiu couldn't even protect himself, so he didn't have the capital to form an alliance with the Kong state. Feng Hu glanced at Feng Wuxie and then looked up at the crazy Wan Qiu and said in a low voice, "I still think we should save him." "Why?" Feng Wuxie raised his eyebrows. "Our opponents are very strong now. Let's not talk about this woman, just the people of the spiritual state, Qin Feiyang Fatso, and that rogue wolf are not people we can deal with. Although Wan Qiu is no match for this woman, he is still a 3-star combat grandmaster and has a perfect battle art. Continuing to form an alliance with him will only benefit us." Feng was said in a low voice. "Makes sense." Hearing this, the 2 sisters nodded in agreement, but their hearts were filled with emotions. Back then, when they first met the people of the spiritual state, they were nothing in their eyes. But in just a short time, the overall strength of the spiritual state had increased. Now it was no longer them who chased after the people of the spiritual state, but the people of the spiritual state who chased after them. It could even be said that they could only run away when they saw the people of the spiritual state. Feng Wuxie pondered for a moment and said, "Since you insist on making a move, then make it quick. Don't dawdle." He couldn't touch tigers, but at this moment, this woman was like a tigress. After saving Wan Qiu, she had to leave immediately. The 3 fire beacon elders nodded. In the blink of an eye, within the sword domain, Wan Qiu bombarded the sword domain barrier like a madman. The woman's expression did not change. She looked at him quietly with a hint of mockery in her eyes. "Don't waste your energy. With your current state, it's impossible for you to shatter the sword domain. It's getting late. It's time to send you away from this world." The woman raised her head to look at the sky, and a trace of killing intent suddenly appeared in her dark eyes. The densely packed battle swords in the void suddenly turned into a dazzling sword light that surged toward Wan Qiu. The terrifying sword light was earth-shattering and instantly drowned Wan Qiu, causing him to feel cold all over. Why? Why? Wan Qiu roared. He would never believe that this woman was targeting him just because she didn't like him. There must be other reasons. Why? The woman muttered to herself. After a moment of silence, she suddenly sent a voice transmission. You can only blame yourself for being blind and provoking a man you can't afford to provoke. Who? Wan Qiu roared. Someone you know very well. The woman abruptly turned her head to the side and saw Feng Wuxie and the other three rushing over. There are so many people who want to die. However, even if you don't come, I won't let you go after I kill this person. The woman whispered. Although it was a whisper, it was clearly heard by Wan Qiu, causing his mind to be greatly shaken. It turned out that this woman's target was not only him, but also Feng Wuxie and the other three. You're really arrogant. Wan Qiu stared at the woman and said in a bone-chilling tone, Arrogant? Why don't I think so? Maybe our views are different. In my eyes, the people I'm killing now are just unimportant people. The woman said indifferently, full of contempt. I'm unimportant? Wan Qiu's eyes turned red when he heard this. Accompanied by a loud bang, a monstrous blood-red light roared out from his body. The battle's soul reappeared. Demon God's hand, kill! With a roar, the demon god of hell immediately stretched out its giant hand and slapped at the sword light with shocking demonic power. An invisible force spread out and imprisoned the woman's battle chi. Actually, he had already calmed down. After all, how could the strongest person in Yuzhou be so weak? He was purely stalling for time, because the woman already had the intention to kill. If he did not think of a way to stall for time, he would probably die in the woman's hands before Feng Wuxie and the other three arrived. Boom! The giant hand slammed down fiercely, shattering the swords one by one. But the giant hand was also collapsing. Hurry up! At the same time, Fire Beacon secretly sent a voice transmission to Feng Wuxie and the twin sisters. A few hundred meters was nothing to the battle sect. Before the demon god of hell's giant hand collapsed, they rushed over and stood a dozen meters away from the sword domain. Boom! Without hesitation, the four of them activated their battle souls. Feng Wuxie's battle soul, Fire Phoenix. Fire Beacon's battle soul, Golden God of War. The twin sisters' battle souls were both ice phoenixes. They were dozens of feet tall and seemed to be cast from ice. Their ferocity was unparalleled. Uft! When the four battle souls appeared, the demon god of hell's giant hand completely collapsed. Wan Qiu spat out blood and his internal organs were injured. At this moment he was extremely weak. Fire Beacon roared, Wan Qiu, hold on for a while longer. Let's attack from the inside and crush the sword domain. Don't worry, I'm tough. No one can kill me. Wan Qiu laughed sinisterly. Roar! The demon god of hell, standing above him, suddenly turned around and punched the barrier. Break! Feng Wuxie and the other three roared. The four battle souls moved together with a monstrous might and attacked the sword domain. This is a good opportunity. At the same time, Fatso's eyes lit up and he said excitedly, Brother Wolf, this is a godsend opportunity. Hurry up and attack. As long as they took away their battle souls, they would not be a match for them even if they had heaven-defying abilities. Wolf King was also very tempted. He looked at Qin Feiyang and asked for Qin Feiyang's opinion. Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed, and he said without hesitation, attack! The opportunity was fleeting, and he could not hesitate. Moreover, this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. Hee. Wolf King laughed sinisterly. A bright golden light appeared behind him and surged into the sky like a waterfall. In the blink of an eye, the golden beast shadow appeared. The peerlessly terrifying ferocious might was like the raging waves of a vast ocean, surging out in all directions. What's going on? At that moment, the woman, Wan Qiu, and Feng Wuxia all looked over in surprise. Seeing the golden beast shadow, Feng Wuxia's expression changed and he roared, "Oh no, it's the battle soul of Ruffian Wolf!" Ruffian Wolf. Does that mean Qin Feiyang is here too? They hurriedly looked down at the golden beast shadow. When Qin Feiyang and the others entered their line of sight, a sense of despair rose in their hearts. The woman from Feng Zhou was already very difficult to deal with. Now that Qin Feiyang and the others were here, was there any chance of survival? Qin Feiyang smiled and said, "We meet again so soon, we are truly fated. To hell with this fate." Their faces darkened and they could not help but curse in their hearts. Suddenly, Feng Wuxia seemed to have thought of something and shouted, "Quickly withdraw your battle souls!" Deprive. But it was too late. With Wolf King's low roar, the golden beast shadow suddenly opened its mouth. Wan Qiu and the others and the woman's battle souls immediately flew uncontrollably into the mouth. "Ha! We've struck it big this time." Fatso shouted excitedly. Originally, they only planned to deprive the woman and Wan Qiu of their battle souls. They did not expect Feng Wuxia and the others to also activate their battle souls at this time. Wasn't this a dish delivered to their door? Damn it! Bastard! Beast, I won't forgive you! But Wan Qiu and the others roared again and again. Their faces were pale. However, the woman in Feng Zhou was somewhat unfathomable. She curiously looked at Wolf King, as if she was not worried about her battle soul being deprived. Suddenly, her gaze turned and fell on Qin Feiyang's face. There was a faint smile on her face. "Qin Feiyang, we finally meet." The woman muttered to herself and cupped her hands. "I hope Brother Qin and Wolf King can be merciful." Qin Feiyang was taken aback and smiled. "What's the reason?" "There is no reason." The woman shook her head. Qin Feiyang said, "Then there's no other way. You're still the same as before, cold and ruthless to outsiders." The woman murmured. Not only was she not angry, the smile on her face became even brighter. Qin Feiyang was puzzled. What was this woman smiling about? Boom! But suddenly, a powerful aura emerged from the forest on the left side of the plain. "There's someone else." Everyone was shocked and looked in the direction of the sound. They immediately saw a bright beam of light piercing through the air like lightning. Boom! That beam of light carried a great power and instantly destroyed the battle souls of Wan Qiu and the others. Lu Xingchen, looking at this scene, Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed coldly. "Let's go." At the same time, Feng Hu roared, turned around, and fled into the depths. Feng Wuxia, the sisters, and Wan Qiu also quickly retreated and soon disappeared without a trace. "Damn it! Fatso, Dong Jingyang, Black Dragon Snake, go after Wan Qiu and the others." Wolf King roared in exasperation. Then he used the void escape step and rushed to the forest on the left side of the plain. But then Qin Feiyang said, "Don't chase." Wolf King and Fatso were stunned and looked at Qin Feiyang in confusion. Qin Feiyang did not explain and looked up at the woman. Coincidentally, the woman also looked at Qin Feiyang and said with a smile, "Brother Qin, you're not going to bully a weak woman like me, are you?" Qin Feiyang smiled and asked, "Do you think you're weak?" The woman smiled and said, "In front of others, my strength is so, but in front of Brother Qin, I really don't have much confidence." Qin Feiyang asked curiously, "Then why aren't you nervous at all?" "You're not a man-eating demon. Why should I be nervous?" The woman asked. Qin Feiyang said, "But many people say that I'm a demon." The woman said, "That's someone else, not me." Qin Feiyang laughed involuntarily. This woman was indeed a bit interesting. he said. May I know Mrs. name? This, the woman hesitated for a moment and said with a smile. You'll know in the future. Goodbye. Then, the woman turned around, took a mysterious step, and quickly disappeared from the sight of Qin Feiyang and the others. Looking at the woman's back, the smile on Qin Feiyang's face instantly disappeared, and his pupils contracted tightly. Wolf King also stared at the woman's back and said in a deep voice, Little Qin Zi, you noticed it too, right? Qin Feiyang nodded. Chapter 633. Auxiliary battle arts and killing battle arts were all at the perfect level. What was the background of this woman? Wolf King suddenly transmitted his voice. Little Qin Zi, are there many perfect battle arts in the capital? Qin Feiyang was slightly stunned and frowned. Do you suspect that she is from the capital? Then tell me, is there any other explanation? Wolf King asked back. Qin Feiyang said, There are indeed many perfect battle arts in the capital, but we can't judge that she is from the capital. Why? Wolf King was puzzled. If she is from the capital, why is she in Feng State, and why did she participate in the Battle of the 9 Provinces? Besides, there are no perfect battle arts in the 9 provinces, but it doesn't mean that there are none in other places. For example, places like the Forgotten Land. Qin Feiyang secretly said. Wolf King nodded without leaving a trace. What Qin Feiyang said was indeed reasonable. Whoosh! At this moment, there was a sound of something breaking through the air. Everyone looked over and saw a young man in white galloping out of the jungle on the other side. It was Lu Xingqian. Fatso and the others were surprised. When did Lu Xingqian leave? You are really careless. Qin Feiyang rolled his eyes at them. The man had just slipped away in front of him, but they didn't react until now. However, it was also because of the carelessness of Fatso and the others that he knew that Lu Xingqian was the mysterious man. Soon, Lu Xingqian came to them and said with a smile, Is it over? What's the result? Qin Feiyang coldly looked at Lu Xingqian and said, In the end, that mysterious person messed things up again. Lu Xingqian looked a little embarrassed and said, It seems that this mysterious man has been secretly watching us. Humph! You'd better not let me catch you. Wolf King coldly snorted and said in a deep voice, Where did you go just now? The mysterious man appeared twice, but you disappeared inexplicably. Is this a coincidence? Earlier, I suddenly saw a figure flash by in the forest here, so I went over to take a look. In the end, I realized that I was seeing things. Lu Xingqian shook his head and smiled. Human shadow? Everyone was bewildered. Fatso frowned. Then why didn't you tell us? Lu Xingqian said. I'm just afraid of alerting the enemy. You are really bold. If there was really an expert hiding there, with your strength as a 7 stars combat emperor, I'm afraid you would have died without a burial place. Wolf King sneered. Even if there is, he wouldn't dare to make a move. After all of you are here. If there is any movement, you will immediately notice it. Lu Xingqian smiled. Fatso and the others were still doubtful. Because it was too much of a coincidence, it was hard to believe. Okay, cut the crap. Let's go. Qin Feiyang said. Lu Xingqian looked at Qin Feiyang gratefully and said with a smile, Let the king crocodile carry us. We can also cultivate on the way. Qin Feiyang nodded. The group jumped onto the king crocodile's back one after another. Lu Xingqian ordered, and the king crocodile strode forward and flew into the depths of the forest. Qin Feiyang stood at the front with his hands behind his back, looking into the depths of the forest. His dark eyes were incomparably deep. Lu Xingqian looked at his back and walked to Qin Feiyang. He transmitted his voice. Don't you want to ask me something? Qin Feiyang said, If I ask, will you answer? No. Lu Xingqian shook his head. Then do I need to ask? However, just because I didn't ask doesn't mean I don't care. I don't care what you do, but don't do anything to hurt us. Qin Feiyang said. Don't worry. I know what I'm doing. Lu Xingqian nodded. You better know what you're doing. Qin Feiyang looked at him meaningfully, then turned to Fatso and Wolf King. He said, I'm going to the castle. You guys cultivate outside. Okay. The man and beast nodded. They also knew the purpose of Qin Feiyang going to the castle. Alchemy scripture. 6-word formula. Because he had broken through to War Master, Qin Feiyang could open the next page of the alchemy scripture and 6-word formula. Whoosh! Qin Feiyang flashed and disappeared without a trace. The exposed castle also landed on the king crocodile's back and continued to move forward. Inside the castle, Brother Qin, who is that mysterious man? As soon as Qin Feiyang entered, Shenlong and the others surrounded him, their eyes full of surprise. I don't know either. Qin Feiyang shook his head. You don't know. Everyone was stunned. Jiang Wei was puzzled. Then why did you say that you already know who he is? I did see him, but he was wearing a mask. I said that to scare him, but he didn't fall for it. Qin Feiyang said, looking helpless. He guessed that these people would definitely ask, so he thought of an answer in advance. I see. Everyone suddenly understood. Qin Feiyang looked up at the iron box on the altar, then looked at the crowd and said, Now that we've left the swamp and everyone's strength has improved during this period of cultivation, we can't always stay here. Everyone's heart skipped a beat. Qin Feiyang was obviously asking them to leave, but the key was that it was too dangerous outside and many people didn't want to leave. Shenlong said, Brother Qin is right. If we keep hiding here, then what's the point of coming to the 9 Nether Yellow Springs? Wu Yan snorted. You're a 1-star battle master now, so of course you have the right to say that. But we're all war emperors. Su Yang smiled flatteringly. Senior Brother Qin, why don't you do a good deed and help everyone break through to the Battle Master realm? As soon as he said that, those who hadn't broken through to the Battle Master realm couldn't help but have green light in their eyes. Qin Feiyang glanced at the two of them and said, If I don't help you, are you going to stay here and not leave? We wouldn't dare, we wouldn't dare. Wu Yan and the others hurriedly waved their hands, their faces full of fear. I think that's what you're thinking. Let me give you a kind advice. Don't be so ungrateful. I've already done my best to bring you here safely. Also, I'm not begging you to leave. I'm throwing you out. After Qin Feiyang finished speaking, he really threw Wu Yan and the others out. In the blink of an eye, only Lu Hong and the others, Ren Wuxuang, Shenlong, Jiang Wei, and Shen Mei were left in the castle. Sigh, I really feel sorry for these people. Shenlong sighed. There's nothing I can do about it. That's how the human heart is. Qin Feiyang smiled faintly and warned, Ran Wuxuang has already reached the critical moment of his breakthrough, so he will stay in the castle for now. After you go out, pay more attention to Dongfang Wuhen and Morong Xiong's movements. The 3 of them nodded. Qin Feiyang waved his hand, and after sending the 3 of them out of the castle, he turned and walked towards the altar. At this moment, Lu Hong opened his eyes and asked, Qin Feiyang, you really don't know who that mysterious person is? Qin Feiyang replied without turning his head, I know, it's Lu Xingqian. It's actually him. Lu Hong's gaze trembled. At the same time, Ren Wuxuang, Lin Yi, Luo Qinxue, and the pangolin also opened their eyes. Their hearts were full of disbelief. Qin Feiyang said, This person is not simple. You have to be extra careful when facing him in the future. They nodded. Then, they didn't ask anything, closed their eyes, and continued to cultivate. Qin Feiyang also cut his finger, squeezed out a drop of blood, opened the iron box, took out the pill scripture and Qingquan pouch, and then opened the 6-word divine formula. When he turned to the 3rd page, a terrifying murderous aura surged out like a tide. On the page, there was a vigorous and powerful word with murderous aura. At the same time, after separating from Qin Feiyang and the others, the woman from Feng State rushed straight to the south. After a few hundred breaths, she stopped in front of a mountain peak about 1,000 feet high, looked up at the mountain peak, and rushed towards the mountain peak. On the edge of a cliff on the top of the mountain, there was a woman in white standing against the wind. Her appearance was not outstanding, but her temperament was very unique. After the woman who fought with Wan Qiu reached the top of the mountain, she ran towards the woman on the cliff and smiled. "I'm back!" The woman in white turned around and asked with concern, "How are you? Are you hurt?" "How can I be hurt? If it weren't for Qin Feiyang and Wolf King coming to join in the fun, none of the people from Yuzhou and Kong State will leave here alive." The woman said disdainfully, looking quite arrogant. "I know you are powerful." The woman in white smiled and asked, "Did Qin Feiyang recognize you?" "No, but he did ask for my name." The woman said, "Then how did you answer?" The woman in white said, "I didn't say anything. Don't worry, I won't show any flaws. What's more, even if I show a flaw, he won't know who I am. After all, so many years have passed." The woman smiled mischievously. The woman in white shook her head and said, "It's not that I'm worried, it's that old man. It's better to be careful in the future. After all, Qin Feiyang's insight is terrifying. If there are too many flaws, he will find out sooner or later. All right, I'll try my best to be careful in the future." The woman nodded. At the same time, deep in the forest, Wan Qiu sat cross-legged on a black rock to heal his wounds. Fire Beacon and the other 3 stood by his side to protect him. Suddenly, Fire Beacon frowned and said, "Wan Qiu, did that woman tell you why she attacked you?" Wan Qiu opened his eyes and said, "She didn't attack me, she attacked us." "What?" The 4 of them were shocked. "This is what she told me personally. After killing me, she will kill you guys. The reason is that we provoked a man we can't afford to offend." Wan Qiu said in a deep voice, "A man we can't afford to offend?" The 4 of them frowned. Wan Qiu said, "I'm guessing that this man might be someone from the spirit state." "Why do you say that?" The 4 of them were puzzled. Wan Qiu said, "Because in the netherworld we can only make enemies with the people of the spirit state." The 4 of them nodded. That was indeed the case, but who was it? Feng Wuxia suddenly raised his eyebrows and said, "Could it be Qin Feiyang?" Fire Beacon shook his head and said, "It's hard to tell. After all, Qin Feiyang is not the only man in the spirit state. Don't guess. The truth will be revealed sooner or later. The most important thing now is to think of a way to avoid these people." Xuanning and her sister said, "Yeah, from the previous situation, the people of the spirit state really want to kill us. If it was before, it wouldn't matter, but now..." At this point, Fire Beacon couldn't help but sigh. To be honest, he was very regretful. If he had known, he wouldn't have provoked those people from the spirit state. Wan Qiu and the others also fell silent. The current spirit state was no longer what it used to be. It was no longer something they could shake. Phew! Fire Beacon let out a long sigh and said, "How about this? Let's find a place to hide first and let Qin Feiyang and the others walk in front. After they leave, we'll continue on our way. If we encounter them in the future, we'll try to avoid them." Hide? Hearing this, Wan Qiu and the others' eyes turned red. This kind of behavior was undoubtedly a great humiliation to proud sons of heaven like them. Chapter 634. Let's talk about Qin Feiyang. He had always wanted to cultivate the 3rd divine art, but now, looking at the introduction of the 3rd god art, he couldn't help but frown, as if he was hesitating. The 3rd divine art was called the kill art. According to the book, the kill art had the ability to increase one's cultivation. Moreover, it could increase one's cultivation by 1 realm. That's right, it could increase one's cultivation by 1 realm. Speaking of which, Qin Feiyang should be happy to have such an incredible power. Why was he hesitating? The reason was that the kill art was extremely bloody. The essence of the kill art was to absorb the blood of living beings to increase one's cultivation. The more blood one absorbed, the more one's cultivation would increase. In other words, to increase one's cultivation, one had to kill living beings. The book did not record in detail how much blood one had to absorb to increase one's cultivation by one realm. However, he did not expect that the blood of 1 or 2 living beings would not be enough. Although Qin Feiyang admitted that he wasn't a good person, he really couldn't do it if he wanted to wantonly slaughter innocent creatures. The kill art was too vicious and murderous. He did not dare to cultivate it. After a while, Qin Feiyang rubbed his forehead and looked away. He flipped to the 3rd page of the Pill Sutra and read it in detail. There were a total of 28 elixir recipes recorded on it. The dust-forgetting elixir could make one forget everything in the past, which was called amnesia. The dust-forgetting elixir could restore lost memories. The blood coagulation elixir could restore lost blood. It was similar to the life blood elixir, but its effect was better than the life blood elixir. The Ghost King elixir could directly destroy a living being's cultivation by one realm. There were also the Essence Soul elixir to repair the Sea of Consciousness and the Spirit Sea elixir to repair the Sea of Qi. In short, all the elixirs that Qin Feiyang had heard of were on it. He also looked at the Essence Soul elixir recipe. A total of 18 herbs were needed. The Jade, Crystal Flower, and the Death Flower were tied for first place. The other 16 herbs were also extremely precious. He did not have any of them on him at the moment. As he continued to read, his eyes suddenly locked onto the last 2 elixir recipes. He had never heard of these 2 elixirs before. One was the 9 Transformation Dragon Blood Elixir, and the other was the Small Creation Elixir. Boom! Qin Feiyang was just about to read the annotations of the 2 pills in detail. But at this moment, a powerful aura suddenly erupted. A breakthrough! He hurriedly looked at Ren Wuxuang. At this moment, Ren Wuxuang's soft and beautiful black hair fluttered in the air. Her snow-white dress fluttered in the wind, and her tender skin was suffused with strands of hazy radiance, causing her to seem extraordinarily stunning. Whoosh! A dozen breaths later, Ren Wuxuang also opened his eyes, and there was a trace of excitement on his face. Qin Feiyang smiled and said, "Congratulations, sis. Now that I've also opened the door of potential, my cultivation speed will definitely not be any slower than yours." Congratulations indeed. Ren Wuxuang stood up, his face full of smiles. He was very happy. Yes, yes. Sister, your talent is extraordinary and rarely seen in 10,000 years. Who would dare to compare themselves to you? Wouldn't that be asking for a snub? Qin Feiyang chuckled. Cut it out. Ren Wuxuang rolled her eyes at him, looked at the pill scripture, and asked, "Did you find any more miraculous pills?" Yes. Qin Feiyang nodded. He would not hide anything from Ren Wuxuang. Let me take a look. Ren Wuxuang curiously walked to the front of the pill scripture and looked at all the pill formulas carefully. In the end, his gaze locked onto the 9 Transformation Dragon Blood Elixir and the Small Creation Elixir. Isn't this the same as the 9 Chu Yellow Dragon Pill and the Potential Elixir? Suddenly, she said in surprise, "Is that so?" Qin Feiyang was slightly startled. After taking a closer look, it was indeed the case. The 9 Transformation Dragon Blood Elixir had the miraculous effect of allowing war masters or war saints to break through their cultivation. The Small Creation Elixir was specially used to open the door of potential for war masters and war saints. In short, the 9 Transformation Dragon Blood Elixir and the Small Creation Elixir were the upgraded versions of the 9 Chu Yellow Dragon Elixir and the Potential Elixir. However, when he saw the success rate of the 9 Transformation Dragon Blood Elixir, Qin Feiyang's eyes froze, as if a basin of cold water had been poured over his head, and his joy disappeared. Although the 9 transformation dragon blood elixir could allow one to break through their cultivation, it could not be compared to the 9 Chu yellow dragon elixir and the scarlet fire colored glass elixir, because the probability was too low. According to the introduction, the 9 transformation dragon blood elixir without elixir veins only had a 5% success rate. The 9 transformation dragon blood elixir with 1 elixir vein had a 10% success rate. 2 elixir veins had a 20% success rate. 3 elixir veins had a 30% success rate, and so on. In other words, only a divine pill with more than 9 elixir veins and a dragon-shaped elixir chi had a 10% success rate. And now, Qin Feiyang could only refine a pill with 4 elixir veins, which was not even half of the success rate. And even if it was a divine pill, it could only allow one to break through a small realm. As for the small creation elixir, it was the same as the 9 transformation dragon blood elixir. It required a small creation elixir to open the door to one's potential. Unbelievable. Ren Wuxuang was shocked to the extreme. He closed the pill scripture and looked at the signature on the cover. Just who was this Wu Tian to be able to create so many miraculous pills? But when she turned her head and saw the disappointed Qin Feiyang, she couldn't help but roll her eyes and say, not to mention the 9 transformation dragon blood elixirs pill formula. Even this name, no one has ever heard of it. You should be satisfied. Yeah, I should be satisfied. Qin Feiyang nodded, opened the pill scripture again, and read the 9 transformation dragon blood elixirs medicinal ingredients in detail. However, just by seeing the first medicinal ingredient of the 9 transformation dragon blood elixir, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows and said angrily, "How is it possible to find this kind of medicinal ingredient?" Ren Wuxuang lowered his head to look and nodded. "It is indeed harder than ascending to the heavens." Because the first medicinal ingredient was dragon blood. Moreover, it had to be the blood of a true dragon, not even the blood of a flood dragon. One had to know. Dragons had always been legends, and no one had ever seen one before. Where could one find dragon blood? Isn't this making things difficult? Qin Feiyang shook his head and continued reading. The 9 transformation dragon blood elixir required a total of 66 medicinal ingredients. Apart from the dragon blood, he had seen the other medicinal ingredients in the Imperial Palace's medicinal treasure vault. But in the 9 prefectures it was extremely rare. It seems that it is impossible to refine the 9 Chu yellow dragon elixir in a short period of time. Qin Feiyang sighed deeply, looked at the medicinal ingredients of the small creation pill, and his eyes widened again. The top 3 medicinal ingredients were actually the 10,000-year 9 suns flower, 10,000-year blood ginseng, and 10,000-year snow crystal. Qin Feiyang was no stranger to these 3 medicinal ingredients. Because the 3 main medicinal ingredients of the potential elixir were these, they were not very rare. It was estimated that Fatso had ready-made medicinal ingredients on him now. But the crux of the problem was that refining the small creation pill required 10,000-year 9 suns flower, blood ginseng, and snow crystal. 10,000 years. The great Qin Empire had only been established for 10,000 years. Where could they find these medicinal ingredients? It was simply impossible. Qin Feiyang patiently read it in detail, and finally let out a sigh of relief. Although the conditions to refine these 2 pills were very harsh, there were still praiseworthy aspects. Take the small creation pill, for example. Even if one failed to open the door of potential the first time, they would not explode and die. Moreover, they could continue to take the small creation pill and try to open the door of potential again. In short, as long as one had enough small creation pills, they would be able to open it sooner or later. The main problem now was the medicinal ingredients. But these medicinal ingredients were basically hopeless in the 9 prefectures. The only place that could possibly have them was the imperial capital. However, Qin Feiyang was not in a hurry. It was clearly written that it was also effective for battle saints. and now he was only a one-star battle ancestor, a full realm away from battle saints. He still had a lot of time to collect these medicinal ingredients. He looked at the bottom of the page. As expected, there was a row of small words. Step into the Battle Emperor realm and you can flip to the next page. Next. He closed the pill scripture and stopped thinking about the problem of medicinal ingredients. His gaze shifted to the 6-word divine arts. In the corner at the bottom of the kill formula, there was also a row of small words. Only after breaking through to the Battle Emperor realm would one be able to flip to the next page and cultivate the 4th divine arts. After pondering for a while, Qin Feiyang still decided to copy the kill formula. Although the kill formula was too bloody, it could be used as a trump card to help him turn the situation around in a critical moment. Moreover, to Qin Feiyang, who yearned for strength, it was a great fortune. However, the amount of battle qi required to copy the kill formula was even greater than that of the return formula and battle formula. Qin Feiyang was still a battle master and possessed 3 types of battle qi. However, in less than an hour, the battle qi in his qi si was completely used up. However, it wasn't a big problem, because he had a lot of battle qi pills and a lot of battle qi pills medicinal ingredients. It was enough for him to copy the kill formula. While Qin Feiyang was copying the kill formula, Fatso and the others were also slowly advancing. Along the way, they gradually encountered all kinds of fierce beasts. However, the strength of these fierce beasts was still within the acceptable range of the group. However, as the days passed, the strength of the fierce beasts they encountered became stronger and stronger. At the beginning, with Dong Jingyang, Shunlong, and the others taking action, Fatso and Wolf King could still cultivate in peace. But on the 10th day, 5 4-star Battlemaster fierce beasts jumped out to block their way, directly injuring Dong Jingyang and the others. As a result, Fatso and Wolf King were unable to cultivate, and with their current strength, the 4-star Battlemaster fierce beasts were no longer a threat to them. Just the fatty alone was enough to deal with them easily. Thus, after a month of hurrying, the group finally walked out of the forest without any mishap. In front of the forest, there was a vast plain. However, the entire plain was barren, and the soil was black as if it was dyed with ink. The blood mist that filled the air was thicker, and the visibility was only about 50 meters. Moreover, there was a gloomy and cold aura everywhere, as if it was from hell. Fatso and the others jumped down from the king crocodiles, back one after another. Looking at the plain in front of them, they did not dare to rashly step into it. Because the plain was too quiet, there was no noise at all. Coupled with the blood mist in the air, it formed a very strange atmosphere that made one's hair stand on end. Everyone be careful. Also, don't leave the team. If anything happens, Fat Lord and Brother Wolf will not save you. Fatso said in a deep voice. He, who had always been frivolous, was also incomparably cautious at this moment. Even Wolf King was the same. His eyes were full of vigilance. Everyone nodded. Let's go. Fatso waved his hand. The group maintained their formation and slowly walked into the plain. Their ears were alert and their eyes were looking in all directions, as if they were facing a great enemy. However, the plain was unexpectedly calm. After walking for nearly 20 breaths, there was still no danger. Suddenly, Dong Zhenyang, who was walking beside Fatso, pointed to a place in front and exclaimed, "Look, what's that?" Everyone looked in the direction he pointed, and a trace of surprise crept into their eyes. About 50 meters away in the blood mist, there was a huge silhouette that looked like a peerless beast lurking there. Be careful, the fatty warned once more before leading the group towards the blurry silhouette. As the distance continued to shrink, the silhouette became clearer. When they walked for more than 20 meters, the group suddenly stopped at the same time as if they had seen something terrifying. Their eyes were full of horror. The silhouette was a huge stone door. The stone door was more than 10 feet tall and 50 to 60 feet wide. It was completely red, as if it had been soaked in blood. The gloomy and cold aura came from this stone door. However, this was not what scared them. What really scared them were the 3 words on the crossbeam above the stone door. Chapter 635. How could there be a gate of hell? As everyone knew, the gate of hell was a very ethereal existence. There were legends among the people that there were not only humans in the world, but also many ghosts. These ghosts lived in a place called the Netherworld. This was where living creatures went after death. In other words, all living creatures that died would go to the Netherworld, be sent to the 18 levels of hell, or be reincarnated. It was rumored that the gate of hell was the first door to the Netherworld, but rumors were just rumors. No one knew if the Netherworld really existed. However, at this moment, the gate of hell appeared in front of them. How could they not be shocked? Did the Netherworld really exist? If they entered the gate of hell, would they enter the Netherworld? The legendary Netherworld was not a good place. The group of people looked at the stone door in horror, not daring to take half a step forward. Once they entered the gate of hell, they would die. What should they do? Wu Yan and the others looked at Fatso and Dong Xingyang. They were all flustered and at a loss. Fatso pondered for a while and shouted, "Boss, we are in big trouble. Come out." After a month of non-stop copying, Qin Feiyang had already copied half of the first stroke of the kill formula. Originally, he wanted to do it in one step and copy it directly, because this way he could break through to the 2-star Battle Master realm and catch up with Fatso and Wolf King. However, he could not ignore Fatso's request for help. After retracting his arm, he closed the 6 words divine formula and closed the iron box. He took a battle chi pill and left the castle with Run Wushuang, appearing on the back of the Crocodile King. As soon as the 2 came out, they frowned. The atmosphere here was not right. Fatso pointed at the gate of hell and said in a deep voice, "Boss, look there!" Qin Feiyang raised his head to look, and his pupils suddenly shrank. At the same time, Rin Wushuang also turned pale. What was going on? They actually came to the gate of hell. Qin Feiyang jumped down and walked to Fatso's side, looking at the stone door seriously. He hesitated for a moment. Someone said, "Why don't we retreat? Maybe Commander Wang Hong and City, Lord Jiang Qianqing, are still waiting for us on the plains." He had heard of it. Those who were timid could not help but be moved. Lu Xingqian frowned and said, "I don't want to give up halfway. If you want to go back, go back." "Why are you, a 7 stars combat emperor, pretending?" Someone shouted angrily. Lu Xingqian turned to look at that person. A cold light flashed in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. He turned to look at Qin Feiyang and said, "Shall we go scout first?" "That's inappropriate." Qin Feiyang shook his head. "Why?" Lu Xingqian was puzzled. He knew Qin Feiyang well. Qin Feiyang was definitely not afraid. He must be worried about something. Qin Feiyang said, "No one knows what's inside. I think it's better for us to go in together. If we encounter danger, we can help each other." Lu Xingqian nodded and said, "What you said makes sense, but they don't dare to go in." Qin Feiyang glanced at the crowd behind him and said lightly, "Those who want to go in, follow me. Those who want to go back, do it as soon as possible." After saying that, he stepped forward and walked toward the gate of hell. Little Qin Zi is right. We don't need useless trash. They won't drag us down. Wolf King smiled disdainfully. He then jumped and landed on Qin Feiyang's shoulder. Fatso, Lu Xingqian, Ren Wushuang, Black Dragon Snake, and Dong Zhengyang quickly followed. King Crocodile also became palm-sized. It lay on Lu Xingqian's shoulder and looked around vigilantly. What should we do? The rest of Wu Yan and the others were in a mess. They suggested to go back because of Lu Xingqian, because only King Crocodile with Lu Xingqian could take them safely through the swamp. But now, King Crocodile left with Lu Xingqian. Qin Feiyang and the others didn't plan to go back either. With their strength, it was a problem whether they could walk out of the jungle behind them alive, let alone through the swamp, because the beasts in the jungle were more terrifying than the dragon crocodiles in the swamp. Taking a step back, even if they could walk out of the jungle and the swamp alive, there were endless skeletons in the plains first. So, it was impossible for them to return to the starting point with just these people. Su Yang sighed deeply and said sadly, "We have no choice but to move forward." Hearing that, everyone's heart was full of helplessness. If they could have another chance, they wouldn't have come to this damn place, even if they were beaten to death. In the end, these people still followed behind Qin Feiyang and the others, walking toward the gate of hell. More than 10 breaths later, the group came to the gate of hell and stopped. Qin Feiyang looked at the stone door and said without turning his head, "No matter what happens later, I hope everyone won't panic and deal with it calmly." "Understood." Everyone nodded. Phew! Qin Feiyang took a deep breath and carefully walked forward, reaching out his hand to press on the stone door. Immediately, a gust of bone-chilling, cold air swept over. But this cold current didn't cause any psychological burden to him. Instead, it made him more energetic and calm. Suddenly, with a shake of his arm, a surge of majestic energy surged out like a landslide. Boom! The stone door suddenly opened quickly. At the same time, Qin Feiyang took a step back and stared at the crack of the door. His nerves were also tense. Crash! Just as the stone door opened, a bloody mist surged out from within like waves of blood. It emitted an astonishing, baleful aura as well as an ice-cold aura. In an instant, the group of people felt as if they had fallen into an ice valley, and their whole body was cold. Boom! A few breaths passed. Accompanied by a deafening sound, the stone door opened completely. Blood mist surged inside, and nothing could be seen. But the aura that rushed out of the stone door made them panic from the bottom of their hearts. Qin Feiyang said in a deep voice, "Fatso, Black Dragon Snake, Rin Wushuang, Shenmei, go to the castle and hide for a while." When the stone door opened, he couldn't help but have an uneasy premonition in his heart. Therefore, for safety, they couldn't all stay outside. But before he could finish, the others began to clamor. "Qin Feiyang, what do you mean? You let them go to the castle, but not us. Aren't you biased? You can't be so selfish, you know." The group of people gritted their teeth, filled with righteous indignation, as if someone owed them. Qin Feiyang waved his hand and sent Fatso and the rest to the castle. He turned around and glanced at Wu Yan and the others. "Actually, I really wanted to let you go to the castle, but you didn't let me finish my words. As for now, don't even think about it. Not only now, but also in the future. Your life and death have nothing to do with me." Qin Feiyang left these words coldly and no longer paid attention to Wu Yan and the others. He took out an ordinary weapon and threw it into the stone door, carefully listening to the movements inside. Looking at Wu Yan and the others, it was too late for regrets. Why were they so anxious? At least listen to what others had to say. Wasn't this cutting off their own path of survival? "Senior Brother Qin, we were wrong. We shouldn't have doubted you. Senior Brother Qin, please be magnanimous and don't argue with us, okay? Really, we will definitely change." The group of people began to plead. But in the end, Qin Feiyang turned a deaf ear. Clang! Suddenly, an ear-piercing metallic sound came from the stone door. If there was a sound, it meant that there was solid ground inside. "Let's go." Immediately, Qin Feiyang did not waste any more time. With a wave of his hand, he took the lead and entered the gates of hell. Dong Xingyang and the others followed closely behind. To be honest, everyone had taken good care of Wu Yan and the others along the way. However, not only did these people not know how to be grateful, they even jumped out to cause trouble time and time again. This was truly unbearable. So Dong Xingyang and the others were too lazy to care about their lives. Life and death were fated. Wealth and honor were up to the heavens. Let them fend for themselves. At the same time, Looking at the backs of Qin Feiyang and the others who did not even turn their heads back, Wu Yan and the others were anxious and angry. Su Yang suddenly roared. Who was the one who started the commotion? It's him. Wu Yan pointed to a tall and sturdy man in white. Bastard, you're courting death. Su Yang's killing intent immediately rose. He took a step forward and landed in front of the white-clothed man, and actually smashed his head with a punch. Although in front of Qin Feiyang and the others, Su Yang's strength was not great, but in the War Emperor realm, he could be considered a top expert. As for that big man, he was only a 7-star War Emperor. He was not prepared in advance, so it was normal for him to be killed instantly. However, Su Yang's actions were somewhat shameful, because he himself jumped higher than anyone else, but now he was taking his anger out on others. What was going on? However, due to Su Yang's strength, the others did not dare to say anything. Wu Yan, who was in cahoots with Su Yang, also sneered and said, There's no need to be angry with them. Hurry up and go in. Otherwise, once Qin Feiyang and the others leave, we will have no way to survive. Su Yang nodded, pointed to the big man lying in a pool of blood, and coldly snorted. Whoever dares to cause trouble in the future and offend Qin Feiyang, he will be the one to end up like him. After saying that, the two of them turned around and ran into the stone door without looking back. These two bastards, why didn't I see them being so arrogant in front of Qin Feiyang? Qin Feiyang only needs to wave his hand to turn them into ashes. Do they have the guts to do so? Yeah, it's our fault for being weaker than him. In order to survive, we have to endure it. The group of people sighed deeply and quickly ran into the stone door. After the last person entered the stone door automatically closed with a rumble. Soon, another 5 people came to the gates of hell. It was Wan Qiu and the others. The gates of hell. Like Qin Feiyang and the others, when they saw the stone door, they all felt panic in their hearts. There's a corpse. The 5 of them walked to the big man's corpse. After a moment of careful observation, Feng Hui said, It's someone from the spirit state. The blood is still warm. He died not long ago. Wan Qiu's eyes flashed coldly. That means they just went in, and there are no traces of fighting here. Before they went in, they must have had an internal conflict. Feng Hui nodded and asked, Should we wait before going in? Wan Qiu clenched his fists and nodded. Wait. This word was practically said through gritted teeth. It was enough to show how sullen he was in his heart. Sigh. At the same time, Chapter 636. Inside the gates of hell, a thick blood fog shrouded everything around. A group of people walked in the blood fog, vigilantly scanning the surroundings, and their faces were extremely solemn. These people were Qin Feiyang and the others. Because the blood fog was too thick, the visibility was only 5 meters, so their speed was very slow. However, it was unexpectedly calm along the way, and no accidents happened. Dong Zhenyang frowned and said, Qin Feiyang, do you think we're thinking too much? Is that so? Qin Feiyang muttered. But why was the uneasiness in his heart getting stronger and stronger? Suddenly, Lu Xingqian said, This place is not simple. Don't let your guard down. What do you mean? Dong Zhenyang was surprised. Lu Xingqian said, I can't explain it, but I just feel uneasy. Qin Feiyang looked at Lu Xingqian in surprise. Even Lu Xingqian felt uneasy. It seemed that it was not an illusion. You have this feeling too? Seeing Qin Feiyang looking at him, Lu Xingqian frowned and said, Qin Feiyang nodded. Immediately, their hearts sank, and they became even more careful. However, as they moved forward, everything was calm and tranquil. They really couldn't figure out why they had such a feeling. Unknowingly, half an hour passed. Qin Feiyang said with a wry smile, Maybe we have an illusion at the same time. Yes, Lu Xingqian also smiled bitterly. But suddenly, Qin Feiyang noticed that there was a blood fog in Lu Xingqian's eyes. Swish! He hurriedly looked at Dong Jingyan and the others next to him, and found that there was a faint blood fog in their eyes. What's going on? Qin Feiyang stopped, his face full of surprise. What is it? Seeing Qin Feiyang suddenly stop, Lu Xingqian and the others looked at him in confusion. Qin Feiyang said, "Can you see if there's any blood in my eyes?" Everyone was stunned and looked at Qin Feiyang's eyes. He wouldn't have known if he didn't look, but when he did, he was shocked. There was also a bloody mist in Qin Feiyang's eyes. Wolf King's eyes were the same. What's going on? Everyone looked at each other. It's too bizarre, Qin Feiyang mumbled. He turned around and walked towards Wu Yan and the others. He wanted to see if everyone was like this. However, when he arrived in front of Wu Yan and Su Yang and saw their eyes, he was instantly shocked and turned pale. Not only were their eyes filled with a bloody mist, even their eyeballs had turned red. He hurriedly checked the eyes of the others and found that the situation was exactly the same as Wu Yan's. Very soon, everyone also noticed this abnormality and couldn't help but panic. "Calm down," Lu Xingqian coldly shouted, looked at Qin Feiyang and said, "We must speed up." Qin Feiyang nodded and shouted, "Full speed ahead, don't leave the team." Everyone nodded. "Let's go." Qin Feiyang waved his hand. He then turned around and led everyone forward at a fast speed. The sky was filled with blood mist. They didn't know where the exit was, so they could only move forward. About 50 breaths of time. Suddenly, a pained wail came from behind. Qin Feiyang quickly stopped and turned around, only to see Xiang Xiaolong lying on the ground, holding his head with both hands, screaming hysterically. What's going on? Qin Feiyang walked to Xiang Xiaolong's side and asked Wu Yan. I'm in front of him. I don't know what's going on. Wu Yan shook his head. I'm behind Xiang Xiaolong, I know. A short young man stood up. Qin Feiyang said, "Hurry up and say it." The short young man said, "I saw it with my own eyes just now. He was running and lying on the ground. But I don't know what's going on." Strange. Qin Feiyang frowned. Let me see. Lu Xingqian pushed Qin Feiyang away and walked to Xiang Xiaolong, frowning. Xiang Xiaolong, are you okay? However, Xiang Xiaolong didn't seem to hear it, and he stopped screaming, stopped struggling, and lay motionless on the ground. Lu Xingqian laughed. It seems that he's fine. Phew! Everyone also let out a long breath. It was really a false alarm. But Qin Feiyang didn't relax and stared at Xiang Xiaolong. He felt that things weren't over, because if Xiang Xiaolong was really fine, he would definitely answer Lu Xingqian. But now, not only did Xiang Xiaolong not answer, but he was also lying on the ground. Obviously, something was wrong. Seeing that Xiang Xiaolong didn't move, Lu Xingqian smiled faintly. If you're fine, get up quickly. Why are you lying there? But Xiang Xiaolong still didn't say a word. What's going on? Everyone was surprised again. Lu Xingqian frowned and reached out to grab Xiang Xiaolong's arm, trying to pull him up. But at this moment, a sinister laugh suddenly rang out, and the person who let out that sinister laugh was Xiang Xiaolong. Immediately after, Xiang Xiaolong suddenly raised his head and pounced towards Lu Xingqian, and the moment he raised his head, Qin Feiyang and the rest were aghast, because the current Xiang Xiaolong and the previous Xiang Xiaolong were two completely different people. The current Xiang Xiaolong not only was his face full of glaring blood vessels, but his eyes were also blood red. Most importantly at this moment, his eyes were ruthless, cold, cruel, and bloodthirsty. Lu Xingqian was also shocked by this sudden scene and instinctively struck out with his palm. Boom! Xiang Xiaolong was sent flying on the spot, spitting out blood. But as if he didn't feel pain, he immediately got up from the ground and pounced on the woman closest to him with a sinister smile. His face was extremely sinister. What's going on? Everyone was bewildered. When the woman saw Xiang Xiaolong pouncing towards her, Her beautiful face turned pale, and she quickly retreated. Dong Xingyang frowned. He seems to have gone mad. Qin Feiyang said, "No, he's not mad. He's lost his mind. Wake up." Lu Xingqian roared and went forward to grab Xiang Xiaolong's neck, then slapped Xiang Xiaolong's face. Uft! Xiang Xiaolong immediately spat out a mouthful of blood, and his teeth were all shattered. But even so, he showed no signs of waking up. He bared his fangs and brandished his claws, laughing sinisterly as if he was possessed. How could this be? Qin Feiyang frowned. Logically speaking, Lu Xingqian's slap should be able to wake Xiang Xiaolong up. But why did it have no effect at all? Suddenly, he glanced at the blood mist in the void, his face full of surprise. Could it be that the blood mist was causing trouble? Dong Zhenyang shouted, "Lu Xingqian, don't waste any more time. Go quickly." This place was too strange. He didn't want to stay a moment longer. What about him? Lu Xingqian frowned. This him was naturally referring to Xiang Xiaolong. Dong Zhenyang said, "Up to you, as long as you don't drag everyone down." However, before he finished speaking, another painful scream rang out. Everyone hurriedly looked over and saw that the person who screamed was the woman who was attacked by Xiang Xiaolong earlier. They saw that the woman, like Xiang Xiaolong before, was half kneeling on the ground, holding her head with both hands, looking extremely painful. Moreover, her face was also quickly crawling with shocking bloodlines. Seeing this scene, everyone present trembled with fear. Qin Feiyang also looked at the woman, but suddenly seemed to have discovered something, and looked up at the woman's head. Suddenly, his eyes sank, and then looked at the other people's heads and said in a deep voice, "It can't be wrong." What? Everyone looked at Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang said, "Their changes are related to this blood mist." Blood mist? Everyone was surprised. This blood mist can drill into our sea of consciousness, erode our rationality, and make us crazy. Look at her head. There are traces of blood mist drilling into the top of her head. Now, not only her, our rationality is also being eroded by the blood mist. Qin Feiyang said. Everyone looked at the woman, and sure enough, there was blood mist constantly seeping into the top of her head, but it was not very obvious, so they did not notice it before. Shenlong said, "Then won't we also become like them?" "Definitely. It's only because her and Xiang Xiaolong's cultivation are the lowest, so they went crazy before us." Qin Feiyang said. As soon as these words came out, the place immediately fell into chaos, and everyone was in danger. "Senior brother Qin, you must help us. I don't want to die." "I'll kneel down. I'll kowtow to you." Suddenly, Wu Yan and Su Yang ran in front of Qin Feiyang, knelt on the ground and begged, "Senior brother Qin, we also kneel down to you. We also kowtow to you. We beg you to be merciful and save everyone." Seeing this, except for Dong Xingyang and a few others, the others also knelt down, their faces full of despair. If the exit was right in front of them, they definitely wouldn't beg Qin Feiyang. But now, there wasn't even a shadow of the exit. Who knew how long they would have to stay here? And this blood mist was still pouring into their heads, and they would follow in Xiang Xiaolong's footsteps at any time. So, Qin Feiyang was their only hope now. In the blink of an eye, the woman finally stopped screaming and laughed sinisterly. Her hair was disheveled and her eyes were blood red. Like a devil from hell, she pounced on the crowd. At the same time, another two people went crazy. After struggling in pain for a while, they pounced on the people next to them like hungry wolves. Damn it! Dong Xingyang cursed and quickly took action, directly ending the lives of the three people. Then, he turned to look at Qin Feiyang and said in a deep voice, "Although I don't want to help them, they are really pitiful now. Why don't I help them again? Pitiful people must have something to hate." Wolf King snorted coldly. Dong Fangwuhen sighed. "We are all from the spiritual state. Why do you have to be so ruthless?" "Ruthless? Wolf King was slightly stunned and suddenly laughed out of anger. Dongfang Wuhan frowned and finally smiled apologetically. I was talking too much. I'm sorry. Because in the current situation, he didn't dare to offend Qin Feiyang and Wolf King. You think you can just say sorry? Wolf King sneered. Then what do you want? Like them, kneel down and apologize to you? Dongfang Wuhan said. Wolf King's eyes flashed fiercely. It looked like it was going to attack directly, but Qin Feiyang stopped it and said, Don't talk nonsense with him. Then he looked at Wu Yan and the others and said, I won't let you enter the castle again, but seeing that Dong Xingyang pleaded for you, I can let Wolf King take you there. As for whether you live or die an end, it will depend on your luck. Dong Xingyang nodded and said, That's good. Wolf King's speed is fast, and your chances of survival are also high. Is that all? Wu Yan and the others were disappointed, but even if they had resentment in their hearts, they didn't dare to show it, because Dongfang Wuhan's words had already angered Wolf King and Qin Feiyang. If they dared to say half a word more, Qin Feiyang and Wolf King would definitely not bring them along. At that time, there would be no hope at all. Chapter 637. However, Wu Yan and the others didn't know that even if they hid their resentment in their hearts, Wolf King was still unwilling to do so. Little Qin Zi, why are you still helping them? Is there something wrong with your brain? Wolf King secretly transmitted his voice. He was a little angry. Qin Feiyang said, We'll talk later. Let's go first. Wolf King raised his eyebrows and jumped down from Qin Feiyang's shoulder. He swept everyone up and used the void escape step to rush forward. As for Xiang Xiaolong, he was also mercilessly killed by Lu Xingchen. After rushing for a while, Wolf King transmitted his voice. Now tell me, why are you still helping them? Qin Feiyang secretly said, I'm doing Dong Xingyang a favor. What do you mean? Wolf King was puzzled. Didn't you hear me? I just said that I'm helping them because Dong Xingyang pleaded for them. In other words, Dong Xingyang now indirectly owes me a favor. Qin Feiyang said, although Dong Xingyang had a grudge against him, he was upright and upright. He was worthy of a deep friendship. Of course, he might not gain anything by doing this. However, he didn't force it. What would happen in the end would be up to fate. Wolf King glanced at him and didn't complain anymore. He led everyone as fast as lightning. After a dozen breaths, another person went crazy. Dong Xingyang asked, What should we do? Wolf King said without turning his head, Just kill him. Dong Xingyang frowned and smashed that person's head with his palm. As for the corpse, he directly threw it into the blood mist. How far is the exit? If this continues, not only them, but even we will not be able to escape. Shen Long transmitted his voice to Qin Feiyang and the others. He was also panicking. As time passed, those combat emperors went crazy one by one, in less than 100 breaths, other than Qin Feiyang and the other war masters. Only Wu Yan and Su Yang remained rational. However, although they hadn't gone mad yet, they were almost driven mad. That was because all those who had lost their minds were directly killed by Dong Xingyang and the others. It could be said that they were merciless. This scared them. This was because the two of them were the weakest among the people who were still alive. They might go crazy in the next moment, and the outcome of going crazy would definitely be the same as the others, obliterated by Dong Xingyang and the others. Where the hell is this damn exit? The two of them were about to go crazy. Jie, suddenly, another sinister laugh rang out. Dong Xingyang and the others instinctively looked at Wu Yan and Wu Yan, killing intent flashing in their eyes. They thought that the two of them had gone mad, but in the end, he found that the two of them had not lost their minds. Then the question was, where did this sinister laughter come from? Jie. Before they could come back to their senses, another burst of sinister laughter rang out. Furthermore, more than one person was laughing sinisterly. There were many of them. These sinister laughter came from the left and right sides. It was like the laughter of the devil, making one's scalp tingle. Whoosh! The next moment, white figures rushed out from the blood mist on both sides and pounced on Qin Feiyang and the others. These people's faces were covered with shocking blood vessels. Their blood-red eyes were cruel and bloodthirsty, like a pack of hungry jackals and wolves. Qin Feiyang and the others hurriedly glanced and found that there were more than 100 people, and the clothes on the chest were embroidered with different words. They were Feng, Yu, Kuan, Chang, and Yi. These 5 words each represented a state. Feng represented Feng's state. Yu represented Yu's state. In other words, these were people from the 5 states. So many. Seeing these people appear, Wu Yan and Wu Yan's eyes suddenly widened. "Senior brother Qin, I beg you, let us go to the castle. I swear I won't have any objections to what you say in the future." The line of defense in their hearts completely collapsed, and they begged Qin Feiyang endlessly. "Shut up!" Qin Feiyang coldly shouted, looked at Dong Xingyang and the others, and said in a deep voice, "Don't entangle with them, let's go!" Wolf King didn't care about anything and was only responsible for leading them to escape, while Qin Feiyang and the others were responsible for fighting the enemy. Fortunately, those who lost their minds were not strong and did not have much impact on them, but that group of people chased them crazily. Gradually, even Qin Feiyang became irritated, because so much time had passed, but there was still no trace of the exit. They couldn't help but wonder if there was an exit here, or did they have to use other methods to make the exit appear? About 100 breaths later, accompanied by a painful howl, Su Yang finally went crazy. "Save me!" He held his head and roared hysterically at Qin Feiyang, his face full of despair. Qin Feiyang was silent. Since entering the inner hall, this person had repeatedly schemed against him, and when he came to the 9 nether yellow springs, he repeatedly jumped out to cause trouble. When encountering such a thing, even a kind person would have the intention to kill. What's more, Qin Feiyang was not a kind person. Seeing Qin Feiyang indifferent, Su Yang suddenly despaired to the extreme and roared, "You bastard, bastard, I swear I won't let you go even if I become a ghost." "Say it again." Qin Feiyang suddenly turned his head, his eyes filled with a bone-piercing, cold light. "Bastard, bastard, your whole family will die a horrible death," Su Yang roared. At this point, what was he afraid of? Anyway, it was a dead end. "Okay, I'll save you." Qin Feiyang stepped forward and directly sent Su Yang into the castle. Seeing this, Wu Yan couldn't help but be stunned. What's wrong with this person? Su Yang scolded him so viciously, but he still saved him. Could it be that he had masochism? Thinking of this, Wu Yan also cursed at Qin Feiyang. "You bastard, come and kill me if you have the guts." Qin Feiyang said, "Okay, I'll save you too." And Wu Yan was stunned and immediately became wild with joy. This guy was indeed a masochist. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have begged him and directly scolded him. Qin Feiyang also did as he said. With a wave of his hand, Wu Yan was also sent to the castle. What's going on? Dong Xingyang and the others looked at each other, not knowing what was going on. Perhaps of the people present, only the Wolf King knew what Qin Feiyang was planning to do. Qin Feiyang didn't say anything more, turned around and landed beside Wolf King and said, "Continue." "Okay," the Wolf King chuckled, but before his voice fell, a sudden change occurred. The surrounding blood mist disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. That's right, it disappeared, and it disappeared into thin air. What's going on? Looking at this scene, their eyes were full of surprise. When all the blood mist disappeared, they looked back and were surprised to find that all the people who had lost their minds in the 5 regions had also disappeared. Was it an illusion? They looked at each other. Pa! Suddenly, Wolf King jumped up and slapped Dongfang Wuhin's face with his claws. Dongfang Wuhin was stunned on the spot and said angrily, "What are you doing?" Wolf King asked, "Does it hurt?" Dongfang Wuhin's face darkened and he roared, "Nonsense! Do you want me to slap you?" "No need, no need." Wolf King quickly waved his claws and said with a smile, "Since you can feel pain, it means that it's not an illusion." "That's true." Dongfang Wuhin nodded, but then he said angrily, "Don't try to change the topic. I can't let you slap me for nothing." Wolf King jumped onto Qin Feiyang's shoulder, picked his nose, and said indifferently, "I didn't slap you for nothing. At least now we know that everything that happened is real." Dongfang Wuhin was so angry that smoke was coming out of his head. Wolf King jokingly said, "So unhappy. Do you want to slap me back?" "Okay." Dongfang Wuhin stepped forward, raised his arm, and slapped Wolf King. Wolf King cast a sidelong glance at Dongfang Wuhin and said, "I won't fight back, but what are the consequences?" Hearing the word consequences, Dongfang Wuhin's arm suddenly stiffened, and he didn't dare to slap him again. "Why aren't you fighting?" "Hurry up, I'm waiting." Wolf King looked at Dongfang Wuhin indifferently, the contempt in his eyes undisguised. Dongfang Wuhin's face was ashen. He couldn't fight, but he could not fight either. For a moment, he was riding a tiger and couldn't get off. Is it appropriate to cause internal strife in front of so many of us? At this moment, a clear voice rang out, breaking the deadlock. Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows and looked in the direction of the voice. He saw a group of people gathered more than 200 meters away. There were a total of 13 people, both men and women, and all of them had extraordinary temperaments. 6 of them had the word Feng embroidered on their chest. The other 7 had the word Yu embroidered on their clothes. They were obviously people from Feng State and Yu State. Furthermore, they were all wore Master S. The valiant woman from Feng State was also among them. When the woman saw Qin Feiyang looking over, she smiled and said, "Brother Qin, we meet again." "Yeah, we're quite fated." Qin Feiyang smiled and began to size up the surrounding environment. The place where they were now was also a black plain without a single blade of grass. However, the blood mist was very light, and the visibility could reach more than 500 meters. The woman asked, "Brother Qin, do you know where this place is?" "Where is this place?" Qin Feiyang was puzzled and looked at the woman again. The woman didn't answer. She turned around and retreated to the side. Then, with a wave of her hand, the other 12 people also stepped aside. When the group of people stepped aside, the pupils of Qin Feiyang and the others suddenly shrank. Behind the group of people, there was a stone tablet standing tall. The stone tablet was 2 meters tall and 1 meter wide. It was completely black and emitted a cold aura. On the stone tablet, there were 3 words that made people tremble in fear. Bridge of Helplessness. The few of them looked at the stone tablet, their hearts surging. Before, it was the gate of hell, and now it was the Bridge of Helplessness. Could it be that the place this road led to was really the underworld, and behind the stone tablet there really was an ancient stone bridge? The stone bridge was more than 2 meters wide. It was like a dark python, winding and winding, extending to the end of the world. There were no railings on both sides of the ancient bridge. The whole thing gave people a cold and mysterious feeling. The woman from Feng province asked, "Brother Qin, this Bridge of Helplessness is a legendary existence. It's mysterious and unpredictable. Do you want to travel with us?" "Travel with us?" Qin Feiyang was stunned and said with a smile, "Traveling with us is fine, but I'm afraid of being plotted against." Brother Qin can rest assured about this. Although we are competitors, we of Feng Province and Yu Province will never do such a despicable thing as plotting against others. The woman smiled faintly. The others from Feng Province and Yu Province also had friendly smiles on their faces. Dong Fong Wuhin said, "Junior brother Qin, they must be planning something. Don't be fooled by their appearance." Qin Feiyong pondered for a moment and said, "Let's go and take a look first." The group of people stepped forward and walked towards the woman and the others. Chapter 638. After dozens of breaths, the two groups of people met up. Suddenly, Qin Feiyong noticed a person sitting cross-legged in the crowd on Yu Zhou's side. It was a man. He was handsome, tall, and had long sky-blue hair. His eyes were slightly closed, and the aura around his body was sometimes strong and sometimes weak. The woman from Feng Zhou explained with a smile, "He's trying to break through to a 3-star battle ancestor. It's precisely because we're waiting for him that we haven't stepped onto the bridge of helplessness." Qin Feiyong's pupils constricted. His gaze moved away from the man and scanned everyone from the two provinces. He smiled and said, "You guys are so strong. If we travel with you, wouldn't it be the same as accompanying a wolf?" "Brother Qin, you're wrong. You're the ones with wolves now, not us," a woman from Yu Zhou said with a smile. As she spoke, she glanced at Wolf King on Qin Feiyong's shoulder. Wolf King chuckled and said, "Little girl, you're wrong too. I'm not an ordinary wolf. I'm an unparalleled and unique divine wolf. Quickly worship me." Uft! The woman from Yu Zhou immediately covered her mouth and laughed. The others were also amused. Qin Feiyong looked at the woman from Yu Zhou. This woman's appearance was also very ordinary, but her aura was almost on par with the woman from Feng Zhou. "Brother Qin, there are a total of 5 1-star battle ancestors, 4 2-star battle ancestors, and 3 3-star battle ancestors, including the blue-haired youth who hasn't broken through yet. There are 4 of them. We can't be careless." Lu Xingqian transmitted his voice. "Yes," Qin Feiyong secretly replied. He looked at the woman from Feng Zhou and asked, "Have you seen Wan Qiu and the others?" "No, they should still be behind us." The woman shook her head. Qin Feiyong frowned and said, "It seems that they are deliberately avoiding us." The woman smiled and said, "With their little strength, do they dare to face us head-on?" Qin Feiyong was stunned. Wan Qiu and the others were already quite strong, but he didn't expect them to be so weak in the eyes of this woman. But then again, with the overall strength of Feng State, they did have the capital to do so. After thinking for a while, Qin Feiyong asked again, "Did you see anyone from He Province and Yun Province?" He had never forgotten Tan Wu, Mo Wushan, and the others. "I didn't see anyone from Cloud State, but I did see someone from He State. But the strange thing is, it seems like there is only one person." The woman frowned. Wolf King sneered, "Of course it's only one person. We've killed all the others." "Killed them all?" The expressions of the woman and the others froze. They originally thought that only one person from He Province had come, or that the others had died under the fangs of the ferocious beasts on the way, but they didn't expect that it was the work of this group of people. This He Province was truly unlucky to have encountered this group of fiends. "Don't talk so much." In the meantime, Qin Feiyong rolled his eyes at Wolf King and asked the woman, "When did you meet him?" Without a doubt, the person from He Province that the woman and the others met was Tan Wu. 2 days ago, right here, but he has already stepped onto the bridge of helplessness. What's wrong? Brother Qin, are you going to kill them all? The woman asked with a smile. Qin Feiyong smiled and then walked towards the bridge of helplessness. Wait, the woman hurriedly stopped him. What's wrong? Qin Feiyong was suspicious. Wolf King, Lu Xingqian, and the others were also vigilant. Don't get me wrong, I don't mean any harm. The woman explained a little, then took out a shabby dagger from her Qinkuan bag and threw it forward. Dong! The dagger fell on the side of the bridge, but when it landed, it splashed up layers of waves. Huh! Qin Feiyang and the others were surprised. Although we are on land, there is a vast ocean under and around the Bridge of Helplessness. Because the water in the ocean is black, similar to the black soil under our feet, and the seawater is still, it is difficult to find it if you don't look carefully. And that black water has a terrifying, corrosive power. Not to mention our flesh and blood. Even if a sharp weapon falls into it, it will melt in the blink of an eye. So I stopped you to remind you to be careful, the woman explained. Heard. Qin Feiyang couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. He cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for your reminder, Mississippi." The woman smiled and said, "Now, can Brother Qin rest assured and travel with us?" Qin Feiyang pondered for a moment and shook his head. "I can't make the decision on this matter. I have to discuss it with everyone." The woman smiled and said, "Mutual respect should be like this." Qin Feiyang smiled faintly and continued to walk towards the stone tablet. Walking closer, besides the words Bridge of Helplessness, there was also a row of small words on the stone tablet. The general content was that as long as you step onto the Bridge of Helplessness, there is no turning back. There is a legend among the people that Mengpa lives on the Bridge of Helplessness, but there is only a bridge here, which shows that this isn't the real hell. The woman walked up to Qin Feiyang and smiled. Who knows if this kind of legend is true or false? Qin Feiyang shook his head and said, "But have you ever thought about the meaning of the Bridge of Helplessness's existence?" The woman answered, "I have, but I can't think of anything." Qin Feiyang sighed. "I really hope we can cross this bridge and reach the other side. It won't be that easy to reach the other side. According to the legends, at the end of the Bridge of Helplessness, there is a place called the Sea of Bitterness. Only by crossing the Sea of Bitterness can you reach the other side. If the gates of hell is so dangerous, then the Sea of Bitterness and the Bridge of Helplessness are definitely not good places either." The woman said. Qin Feiyang nodded, turned to look at the woman, and said, "Speaking of the gates of hell, I suddenly thought of something. How did you guys get out?" The woman thought back for a moment and said, "I remember at that time we were about to lose our minds, but the blood mist suddenly disappeared." Qin Feiyang said, "Our situation is the same." The woman said, "According to our speculation, it should be related to our cultivation." "What do you mean?" Qin Feiyang was suspicious. The woman asked, "Are all of you war sect members who survived?" Qin Feiyang nodded. "In that case, our speculation is true. At first, we all suspected that the existence of the gates of hell was to eliminate the weaker ones. But we don't have any evidence, so we can't be sure. Now that I've heard you say that, I can basically conclude that only people above the War Master level can pass through the gates of hell. As for those who have not reached the War Master level, their minds will be corroded by the blood mist, and they will forever be buried inside." The woman said. Qin Feiyang was startled and said in surprise, "That seems to be the case." At that time, when Su Yang and Wu Yen were here, the blood mist had always been there. But when he sent the two of them into the castle, the blood mist immediately dissipated. There was definitely a connection between the two. To be honest, the Great War of the 9 Provinces is very unfair to those War Emperor-s, because no matter how hard they work, they won't be able to reach the other side. The woman sighed, somewhat angry. How can there be fairness in this world? Strength is the way of the king. If you want to blame someone, you can only blame them for not having the awareness. Qin Feiyang said indifferently. There was no way to sympathize with these people. Because no one forced them to come, they came voluntarily. Moreover, before entering the 9U Yellow Springs, the various big shots had repeatedly said that the 9U Yellow Springs was extremely dangerous and that they had to act according to their capabilities. But they just didn't listen. What could they do? So, no matter if they lived or died, they couldn't blame anyone else. This was a path they had chosen. The woman was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Although what you said is very cruel, it does make sense." Qin Feiyang laughed, turned around, and walked in front of Dong Xingyang and the others, and sent a sound transmission. Whether you want to travel with them or not, you decide. The group immediately fell silent. A moment later, Dong Xingyang sent a sound transmission. It's better if we go our own way, so that we don't have to be on guard all the time. It's tiring. Lu Xingqian said, I also think it's better to go our own way. Is that what you all think? Qin Feiyang looked at Shenlong and the others. Dongfang Wuhan, Murong Xiong, Shenlong, and Jiang Wei all nodded. All right, we'll do as you say. Qin Feiyang nodded, turned to look at the woman from Fengzhou, and laughed. We've discussed it, and feel that it's better not to trouble you. So it's like that. The woman couldn't help but feel a trace of disappointment in her eyes. She smiled and said, Since that's the case, I won't force you. However, you are all in a bad state right now. I suggest you rest here first and wait until you recover to your peak state before setting off. Thank you. Qin Feiyang cupped his hands and thanked her, then looked at Dong Xingyang and the others. What she said makes sense. You all rest here. I'll go to the castle with Wolf King. They nodded. Be careful. Qin Feiyang secretly warned them, then took Wolf King to the castle. Inside the castle, Wu Yan and Su Yang had already regained their senses, and the blood on their faces had disappeared. At this moment, the two of them were sitting cross-legged in a corner, talking and laughing about something. Seeing Qin Feiyang appear, the two of them didn't get up and had a fearless attitude. Wu Yan laughed. Senior brother Qin, I still have to thank you for saving our lives, but I never thought you would have such a special hobby. Su Yang said, Yeah, I've seen all kinds of weird people, but this is the first time I've seen a weird hobby like being scolded by others. There was a hint of ridicule in the two's eyes. Little did they know that they were already in trouble. Qin Feiyang looked at the two of them faintly and said, Are you done talking? Yes. By the way, if you need help in the future, come to us at any time. We are not strong, but we can still scold people. The two of them laughed. Qin Feiyang shook his head and sighed. I've seen a lot of stupid people, but it's the first time I've seen someone as stupid as you two. As soon as this remark came out, Fatso, who was watching the show by the side, moved closer to Wu Yan and Su Yang with a wretched smile. Like Wolf King, he knew Qin Feiyang well. He already knew why Qin Feiyang saved Wu Yan and Su Yang, but he didn't pay attention to it before, letting the two of them be arrogant first, because the more arrogant they were, the more fun it would be to beat them up. At the same time, Lu Hong, Lin Yi, and the pangolin also opened their eyes, looked at Wu Yan and Su Yang sarcastically, and shook their heads. Only Luo Qianxue seemed to be unaware of it. After all, she was much older than Lin Yi and others. Her mentality was naturally different. At the same time, Shen Mei looked at the expressions of Qin Feiyang and others, and she also showed a look of realization. She secretly transmitted a voice to Ren Wushuang. Just now, Wu Yan and Su Yang were talking so seriously. I almost believed that Qin Feiyang has this kind of weird hobby. How is that possible? Ren Wushuang responded. She couldn't tell whether he was happy, angry, or sad. After getting along for so long, how could she not know Qin Feiyang's character? Shen Mei looked at Ren Wushuang with deep meaning and said secretly, It seems that you don't plan to save them. They asked for it. They deserve it. Chapter 639. At the same time, hearing Qin Feiyang's sarcastic words and looking at Fatso's wretched expression, Wu Yan and Wu Yan felt a strong uneasiness in their hearts. Could it be that they had misunderstood Qin Feiyang's intentions from the beginning? Qin Feiyang did not say anything. He took 2 steps back, crossed his arms in front of his chest, and looked at the two indifferently. However, the Wolf King, jumped down from his shoulder. Together with Fatty, they circled Wu Yan and her companion from the left and right. You actually said that boss is masochistic. I have to admit that your imagination is really rich. Fatso shook his head and mocked. Hearing this, the two of them turned pale. There was no doubt that they had misunderstood Qin Feiyang's intentions. Qin Feiyang sent them to the castle not to save them, but to kill them. Senior brother Qin, we were wrong. Yes, senior brother Qin, we thought we were smart and reaped what we sowed. You can beat us or scold us, but please don't kill us. With a plop, the two of them directly knelt on the ground and begged in panic. Fatso chuckled and said, Don't worry, we definitely won't kill you. Thank you, senior brother Fatty. We will never forget senior brother Fatty's great kindness. The two of them were overjoyed and hurriedly kowtowed to thank him. You're welcome. Listen to Fat Lord first. We didn't kill you because if we did it would be too easy for you. Fatso chuckled. Boom! The two of them were like a bolt from the blue, rumbling in their heads. The joy from before disappeared in an instant. Are you desperate now? There's no other way. You're courting death. Fatso's eyes surged with a cold light. He took a step forward and punched the two of them in the left eye. Ah! Two screams like pigs being slaughtered suddenly resounded. The two of them were blasted away on the spot. Their eyeballs also burst and blood spurted out like a column. Fatso smiled sinisterly. What's the use of keeping him alive if he has eyes but can't see? Master Fatty, I beg you, please spare us. We'll be your slaves and carry your shoes. The two of them hurriedly got up, covered their eyes, endured the pain, and begged. You think you're fit to carry Fat Lord's shoes? Fatso smiled disdainfully. He lifted his leg and kicked the two in the stomach. Bang! Ah! The two of them flew out and crashed into the wall behind them. Blood spurted out of their mouths. One had to know. Fatso was now a 2-star war master. How could the two of them, who were mere war emperors, withstand such a kick? His Qi-Si was directly shattered. Once the Qi-Si was shattered, without the Spirit Sea pill to repair the Qi-Si, even if one was lucky enough to survive, they would be a cripple for the rest of their lives. Ah! The two of them lay on the ground, covering their eyes and abdomen, howling in pain. In the meantime, all hopes were dashed. This was because there was no spiritual ocean pill to be found in the 9 prefectures, because there was no pill formula, not to mention the pill formula, whether or not he could find all the medicinal ingredients was one thing. This was a dead end. For a martial artist, not being able to cultivate was even more painful and despairing than being killed. Bastard, damn fat pig, if you have the ability, then kill us. If I, Wu Yan, frown, then I'm a grandson of a turtle. The two of them roared hysterically. Right now, the two of them only had one thought in their minds. They wanted to die. Rather than live and suffer, they might as well die happily. However, Fatso had no intention of killing them, slowly torturing and destroying them. He wanted the two of them to taste the feeling of living a life worse than death. Let the two of them die in regret. Mournful screams could be heard incessantly. The castle was filled with a pungent smell of blood. Looking at the miserable state of the two of them, Wolf King couldn't help but shudder. He shook his head and said, Looks like there's no need for brother to do anything. Then he returned to Qin Feiyang's shoulder, with a ruthless coldness in his eyes. Qin Feiyang, on the other hand, just looked at the two of them from beginning to end. His expression was very calm, without the slightest pity or sympathy. After a full hour, Fatso finally stopped. The two of them could no longer scream. They were lying on the ground like 2 puddles of mud. Their faces were beyond recognition, and they were only left with their last breath. At this time, Qin Feiyang also finally retracted his gaze, turned to look at Xinmei and Ren Wushuang, and said with a smile, Do you want to go to the Bridge of Helplessness? Xinmei shook her head and said, Forget it. I just want to leave the 9 underworlds alive. Ren Wushuang pondered for a moment and said, I want to try. Qin Feiyang and Shen Mei were not surprised by Ren Wuxuang's decision, because Ren Wuxuang was such a strong-willed woman. Fatso was stunned and said discontentedly, "Boss, why don't you ask Fat Lord?" Qin Feiyang glanced at Fatso and was too lazy to speak. He walked to Wu Yan and Ren Wuxuang, grabbed one of them in each hand, and left the castle with Wolf King and Ren Wuxuang. Fatso hurriedly said, "Hey, hey, hey! Fat Lord also wants to see it." "That's enough. If I really let you go, I'm afraid you'll be so scared that you'll pull up your pants and run." Lu Hong despised him. "Little Hong, Fat Lord doesn't like to hear your words. Fat Lord is handsome, wise, and powerful. How can a mere bridge of helplessness scare Fat Lord?" Fatso looked disdainful. "With your face and body, you still call yourself handsome?" Lu Hong was really speechless. Although this damn fatty strength had increased, his skin had also become thicker. No, he didn't know what shame was at all. Outside, Dong Xingyang and the others were sitting cross-legged. Their injuries had almost recovered. Dong Fangwuhen said, "Do you think Qin Feiyang is really masochistic?" Morong Xiong nodded and said, "I think so. Otherwise, why would he save Wu Yan and Ren Wuxuang?" Lu Xingqian pondered for a while. As if thinking of something, he raised his head and looked at Dong Fangwuhen and Ren Wuxuang with a hint of ridicule in his eyes. At first, he couldn't figure it out, but after thinking about it carefully, he understood. Swish! At this moment, Qin Feiyang appeared out of thin air. The pungent smell of blood immediately rushed toward Dong Xingyang and the others. They were surprised. When they saw Wu Yan and Su Yang, they couldn't help but feel their scalps go numb. Lu Xingqian sneered and said, "Now, do you still think he's masochistic?" "Masochistic? I think he's more like a sadist." Dong Xingyang shook his head and smiled bitterly. Dong Fangwuhen and Morong Xiong looked at each other with a trace of fear in their eyes. Fortunately, they didn't say anything at that time. Otherwise, they might end up like Wu Yan and Ren Wuxuang. After Qin Feiyang came out, he didn't say a word and walked toward the bridge of helplessness with Wu Yan and Ren Wuxuang. What does he want to do? Dong Xingyang and the others, as well as the people of Feng Province and Yu Province, looked at him in puzzlement. Qin Feiyang walked to the head of the bridge and scanned the black ocean below the bridge of helplessness. Suddenly, he lifted Wu Yan and Ren Wuxuang and threw them hard. Boom! The two of them fell into the ocean, splashing up waves after waves. The corrosive power of the sea was really terrible. The two didn't even have time to scream before they died. Seeing this scene, the hearts of everyone present trembled. On one hand, they were shocked by the corrosive power of the sea. On the other hand, they were frightened by Qin Feiyang's means, especially the people of Feng Province and Yu Province. They really couldn't figure out how the two offended Qin Feiyang to make Qin Feiyang be so ruthless. Okay, the hindrances have been dealt with. Have you rested well? If so, let's go. Qin Feiyang clapped his hands casually and turned to look at Dong Xingyang and the others. Almost. Dong Xingyang got up and said, "Lu Xingqian, Dong Fangwuhen, Morong Xiong, Xinlong, and Jiang Wei also got up one after another." Qin Feiyang nodded, looked at the woman from Feng Province, and said with a smile, "Miss, see you later." The woman sighed. "Are you really not going with us?" Qin Feiyang smiled faintly. "This is everyone's decision, sorry." The woman smiled helplessly. "Well, then, I wish you a safe journey." "Thank you." Qin Feiyang cupped his hands and said, then turned around and stepped toward the bridge of helplessness. Ren Wuxuang and the others also quickly walked toward Qin Feiyang. Boom! But at this moment, a powerful aura suddenly burst out. Huh! Qin Feiyang was surprised and turned his head to look. It turned out that the aura came from the blue-haired young man. Senior Brotherling has broken through. Now the strength of our U province has increased a lot. The people around the blue-haired young man immediately exclaimed in surprise. Senior Brotherling? Qin Feiyong raised his eyebrows. Wolf King, who was lying on his shoulder, said, Is there a problem? No problem. I just suddenly thought of someone. Qin Feiyong said. Who? Wolf King asked secretly. Swish. Suddenly, the blue-haired young man opened his eyes, and two bright beams of light burst out of his eyes. When he saw this person's eyes, Qin Feiyong's eyes trembled slightly. This person's eyes were also sky blue hair, sky blue eyes, and this person's surname. How could there be such a coincidence in this world? At the same time, the blue-haired young man got up and cupped his hands to the people around him, saying with a smile, Thank you for protecting me these days. As he spoke, he quickly restrained his aura. Why are you so polite to us? That's right, if it weren't for Senior Brotherling, we wouldn't have been able to come here. We should be the ones thanking you. The people from Yu province laughed. The blue-haired young man smiled and turned to look at Qin Feiyong, saying, I was breaking through earlier, so I didn't greet you in time. Please forgive me. However, Qin Feiyong acted as if he didn't hear anything. He looked at the blue-haired young man up and down, as if he was thinking about something. The blue-haired young man was stunned for a moment, then smiled and said, I've long heard of Brother Qin's name. Now that I've finally met you, it's truly my honor. But Qin Feiyong still didn't answer. What's going on? Ren Wushuang and the others looked at each other, their eyes filled with suspicion. The people from Feng province and Yu province were also puzzled. But if one looked carefully, they would discover that four of them had unnatural expressions. One of them was the blue-haired young man from Yu province. The other person was also from Yu province. It was the woman who spoke to Qin Feiyong earlier. The remaining two people were from Feng province. One of them was the valiant woman who suppressed Wan Qiu. The other was also a woman. Her appearance was also very ordinary, but the aura she exuded was not inferior to that valiant woman. It was obvious that she was also a 3-star war sect. The 3-star war sect of the two provinces all had such expressions, which was worth pondering over. Cough! The blue-haired young man coughed and looked at Qin Feiyong again. He asked suspiciously, Brother Qin, is there a problem? Qin Feiyong finally came back to his senses. He shook his head and said with a smile, Nothing. It's just that when I saw Brother Ling, I suddenly thought of an old friend. As soon as he said this, the blue-haired young man and the three women's expressions froze, but they quickly returned to normal. The blue-haired young man smiled and said, It's my honor to make Brother Qin think of an old friend. May I ask who Brother Qin is thinking of? A deceased person. Qin Feiyong lowered his head. There was a hint of reminiscence in his eyes. Suddenly, he sighed deeply and looked up at the blue-haired young man. He smiled and said, Let's not talk about it. We'll be leaving first. The blue-haired young man cupped his hands and smiled. I look forward to meeting Brother Qin next time. Qin Feiyong smiled faintly and turned to look at the Bridge of Helplessness. Wolf King glanced at the blue-haired young man and thought, Little Qin Zi, who did you think of just now? Ling Yunfei. Qin Feiyong said. Wolf King's gaze also trembled. He looked at the blue-haired young man again. Don't talk about it. Except for the appearance, everything else was really similar to Ling Yunfei. However, Ling Yunfei's death was absolutely true. It was impossible for him to appear in front of everyone again. Wolf King patted Qin Feiyong's head and comforted him. The dead can't be brought back to life. Don't think too much. Qin Feiyong nodded. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the Bridge of Helplessness without hesitation. Ren Wushuang walked beside him. Lu Xingqian and the others followed behind them in turn. They walked forward cautiously. The blue-haired young man and the others didn't withdraw their gaze until the group disappeared in the blood fog. The woman from Feng Zhou said, "Fortunately, he didn't agree to go with us. Otherwise, our identities might really be exposed by him after a long time." The blue-haired young man said, "So, we have to be more careful when facing him in the future." The three women nodded without leaving a trace. "Let's go too." The blue-haired young man waved his hand, and a group of people rushed onto the Bridge of Helplessness. Time flew by. 3 days passed. On the Bridge of Helplessness, there was dead silence. Qin Feiyang and the others didn't know how far they had walked. However, along the way, nothing happened, which made them feel rather surprised. They even wondered if this Bridge of Helplessness was the same as the gates of hell. They needed to find another way to make the end appear. Another 3 days passed. They finally couldn't help but stop. Dongfang Wuhan frowned. "Isn't this too quiet?" Dong Xingyang said in a deep voice, "There must be a demon when things are abnormal. Maybe unknowingly, we have already fallen into a dead end." "You mean we might be going around in circles?" Murong Xiong was surprised. Dong Xingyang said, "We can't rule out this possibility." "Huh." Suddenly, Ran Wushuang looked ahead in surprise. "What's wrong?" Everyone looked at her in confusion. Ran Wushuang pointed to the front and said, "Look, is there something over there?" Qin Feiyang and the others were taken aback. They looked over, but other than the blood mist, they didn't see anything. Lu Xingqian laughed. "Wushuang, are you hallucinating?" "Is that so?" Ran Wushuang stared over there, her brows tightly knitted. Suddenly, she exclaimed, "Look, it's here again." Qin Feiyang and the others looked over again, and their eyes were suddenly filled with bewilderment. In the blood mist over there, there was a blurry shadow. The few of them looked at each other and immediately set off, speeding forward. 10 breaths later, they saw the true face of the shadow. It was a stone door. To be exact, it was just a door frame without a door. The door frame was dark and more than 3 meters high. It was located on the Bridge of Helplessness, emitting a cold and mysterious aura. A moment later, Chapter 640. On the door frame, there were no words or carvings. It was as smooth as a mirror. Apart from a cold and mysterious aura, he didn't sense any danger. Behind the door frame, there was still an ancient stone bridge with no end in sight. In other words, this door frame was not the exit of the Bridge of Helplessness. But what was the meaning of this door frame? If the door frame was just to decorate the Bridge of Helplessness, they wouldn't believe it even if they were beaten to death. Because in this kind of place, everything basically had its meaning and value. After pondering for a while, Qin Feiyang turned to look at Dongfang Wuhan and said with a faint smile, "Senior brother Wuhan, I'll have to trouble you to explore the door frame." "Me." Dongfang Wuhan pointed to his nose and looked at Qin Feiyang in astonishment. Qin Feiyang nodded. "I may not be able to. Look, in terms of strength, I'm not as good as Wolf King. In terms of wisdom, I'm not as good as you. So I think it's better for you two to explore the way." Dongfang Wuhan said with a smile. Wolf King said with a smile, "Senior brother, you're too polite. I believe that with senior brother's ability, there's nothing you can't do." "I believe so too." Qin Feiyang nodded with a smile and said, "Senior brother, you're not afraid, are you? If so, then I won't force you." "Afraid? Humph. In this world, there's nothing I'm afraid of." Dongfang Wuhan snorted and immediately walked towards the door frame. Qin Feiyang and Wolf King looked at each other with a trace of ridicule in their eyes. Sometimes, self-esteem could be the death of a person. Just like now, if Dongfang Wuhan was willing to put down his self-esteem and admit that he was afraid, then Qin Feiyang really couldn't let him explore the way. Soon, Dongfang Wuhan walked under the door frame and looked at the empty void in front of him, looking quite nervous. Suddenly, He regretted it. Qin Feiyang and Wolf King were echoing each other. In fact, they were trying to provoke him. He also knew that. But why couldn't he remain calm and take this risk? Seeing Dongfang Wuhan not moving for a long time, Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed, and he said with concern, "Senior brother, if you really don't dare, then forget it. Don't force yourself too much." "Damn bastard." Dongfang Wuhan cursed inwardly, but there was a smile on his face as he said, "Junior brother Qin, you underestimate me too much. Am I the kind of person who gives up halfway? Besides, since you call me senior brother, then I should take up this responsibility and help you solve your problems." Dongfang Wuhan added. Qin Feiyang's face twitched. "You're going too far?" Since that was the case, he would continue to put on this show. He rubbed his nose and said, "Senior brother, you're so benevolent and righteous. How touching." "Yeah, tears are coming out." Wolf King nodded. He blinked his big eyes and actually squeezed out 2 drops of tears. "Damn, why don't you become an actor?" Qin Feiyang couldn't help but curse in his heart, feeling rather speechless. Wolf King secretly laughed sinisterly, waved his claws at Dongfang Wuhan, and roared sorrowfully, "Senior brother, have a safe journey." The faces of Ren Wushuang and the others at the side were dark. This bastard, can't he be more tactful when cursing others? Do you think others are idiots? How can you not understand such obvious words? Dongfang Wuhan glanced at Wolf King from the corner of his eyes, and there was an astonishing light flashing in the depths of his eyes. But he didn't say anything. He gritted his teeth and stepped through the doorframe. At the same time, Qin Feiyang and the others also held their breaths, firmly staring at Dongfang Wuhan. But as time passed, Dongfang Wuhan actually stood there motionless. Because his back was facing everyone, they couldn't see his expression. "What's going on?" Shinlong was surprised. Wolf King said, "Morong Bear, go take a look." Morong Xiong said angrily, "Why?" "Because I'm stronger than you." Wolf King said proudly. Morong Xiong glared at Wolf King, his hands tightly clenched together. "What? You're still not convinced? It seems that you want to swim in the sea." Wolf King sneered, and the threat was no longer concealed. Morong Xiong's pupils shrank as he looked at the black sea below, his eyes full of fear. "Damned beast, just you wait. Sooner or later, I will make you kneel and beg for mercy." He secretly roared and braced himself to walk toward Dongfang Wuhan. There was no other way. Even if he was unwilling, Wolf King's obscene power was in front of him, so he could only compromise. Everyone's eyes fell on Morong Xiong again. As a result, Morong Xiong was the same as Dongfang Wuhan, standing there motionless. Lu Xingqian said in a deep voice, "There's a problem." Ren Wushuang shouted, "Dongfang Wuhan, Morong Xiong, quickly answer me." However, not only did the 2 not answer, they didn't even turn their heads, as if they were imprisoned there. Qin Feiyang glanced at their backs and said, "You guys stay here and don't move. I'll go take a look." "Be careful," Ren Wushuang warned. Among all the people present, there was no one more suitable than Qin Feiyang, because he was cautious enough and had many means. More importantly, he had the castle. If he encountered any danger, he could escape at the first moment. Qin Feiyang nodded and said to Wolf King, "Protect sister." "Don't worry." Wolf King secretly responded and jumped onto Ren Wushuang's shoulder. Phew! Qin Feiyang took a deep breath and slowly walked towards Dongfang Wuhan and the other man. The hearts of Ren Wushuang and the rest also rose to their throats. Walking to the doorframe, Qin Feiyang did not hesitate and directly landed beside Dongfang Wuhan. Then, he turned his head, wanting to see the expressions on their faces. But just as he turned his head, Dongfang Wuhan and Morong Xiong in front of him disappeared without a trace. "What's going on?" Qin Feiyang was surprised. He rubbed his eyes and opened them again. But this time he saw an even more incredible scene. The bridge of helplessness disappeared. The door frame was also gone. Ren Wuxuang and the others were also gone. The black ocean also disappeared. It was replaced by a luxurious palace. On the ground, there were pieces of snow-white jade, spotless. On the walls on all sides, there were all kinds of jadeite and colored glass inlaid, emitting a hazy glow. In the four corners of the palace, there were 4 thick stone pillars standing tall. On each stone pillar, there was a golden dragon engraved, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, vivid and lifelike. At the front of the palace, there was a bed made of gold. Every single pattern on the bed was meticulously carved. This place could be said to be extremely luxurious, and Qin Feiyang was lying on the bed at this moment, covered with a golden quilt. What's going on? Qin Feiyang opened his eyes and looked at the magnificent roof of the palace, his eyes full of surprise. Gradually, a different kind of throbbing arose in his heart. This place was somewhat familiar. Suddenly, he sat up abruptly. Immediately, a heart-wrenching pain came from all over his body, and he couldn't help but let out a miserable groan. Duh! Before Qin Feiyang could figure out why his body was in pain, accompanied by a burst of hurried footsteps, 2 young women dressed in palace attire ran in from outside the door. "Your Highness, you're finally awake." As soon as the 2 women saw Qin Feiyang sitting on the bed, they shouted in surprise, "Your Highness!" Hearing this name, Qin Feiyang felt like a bolt from the blue, and his body and mind trembled. He remembered. This was the bedchamber where he used to live. This bedchamber was built by his father, the current emperor of the Great Qin Empire, personally. He remembered that this was a birthday gift from his father on his 8th birthday. Although it was just a place to sleep, it had an extraordinary meaning. On the left side of the bedchamber was the martial arts treasury of the imperial palace. On the right side was the current emperor's bedchamber, which was less than half a mile away. He still remembered the reason why his father gave him this bedchamber. First, it was convenient for him to enter the martial arts treasury and study various martial arts techniques, because when he was a child, his biggest hobby was to go to the martial arts treasury. Second, it was convenient for the emperor to teach him cultivation. At that time, because of his outstanding talent, the emperor often came to teach him personally. It could be said that when Qin Feiyang was a child, he was doted on by thousands of people. However, he was no longer the 14th prince of the past. Why was he lying here? Qin Feiyang's mind was in a complete mess. The 2 palace maids ran up and said with concern, "Your Highness, you just woke up and your body is still very weak. Lie down and have a good rest." At the same time, the 2 women held Qin Feiyang's shoulders and arms and gently put him on the bed. Qin Feiyang was completely confused and let the 2 palace maids do whatever they wanted. He was also very familiar with these 2 palace maids. One was called Qin Shi, and the other was called Qin Yu. They were about 15 or 16 years old and looked quite attractive. There was a rule in the imperial palace that all the palace maids, guards, or eunuchs who entered the imperial palace, no matter what their surname was before, had to change their surname to Qin. As for what name to change, it was decided by the master they served. Therefore, the names of these 2 palace maids were personally given by Qin Feiyang. After covering Qin Feiyang with the bedding, Qin Shi asked, "Your Highness, are you feeling uncomfortable?" Qin Feiyang had already calmed down, but he still didn't say a word and carefully pondered the ins and outs of this matter. He was still on the bridge of helplessness before, but as soon as he entered the door frame, he returned to the imperial palace. Could it be that the door had a transmission function? But that couldn't be right. If it really had a transmission function, why hadn't Dongfang Wuhan and Murong Xiong been transmitted away? What was going on? "Your Highness, please speak quickly. Don't scare us, okay?" Seeing Qin Feiyang not saying a word, Qin Shi and Qin Yu's faces were full of anxiety. Qin Feiyang looked at the two women and couldn't help but smile. Although these two palace maids didn't have the bloodline power of the Qin clan, they were the closest people to him besides his mother. Back then, in private, he had even called the two of them elder sisters. Seeing the smile on Qin Feiyang's face, Qin Shi and Qin Yu breathed a sigh of relief. Qin Yu said with a smile, "Your Highness, you must be hungry after being unconscious for so long. What do you want to eat? I'll immediately order the imperial kitchen to prepare it." Unconscious? Qin Feiyang was taken aback and asked, "How long have I been unconscious?" The moment he opened his mouth, he froze. Why was his voice so immature? It was not his current voice at all. Chapter 641. What was going on? Could it be that he had transmigrated to the past? Thinking of this, Qin Feiyang hurriedly raised his arm. He didn't know if he didn't look, but when he saw it, he was shocked. This arm was too thin. The skin was also very tender. Then, he endured the pain and sat up, lifting the quilt. When he saw his legs, he was dumbfounded. These small arms and legs, was it really him? "Your Highness, what's wrong with you? If you have something to say, just say it. Don't scare us anymore, okay?" Qin Feiyang's series of inexplicable actions frightened Qin Yu and Qin Shi. Did I really transmigrate? Qin Feiyang's brows were tightly knitted together. He suddenly said, "Sister Yu, go get a mirror." Mirror? Qin Yu and Qin Shi looked at each other, their eyes full of confusion. "Hurry up," Qin Feiyang urged. Okay, I'll go right away." Qin Yu nodded repeatedly, turned and ran out of the palace. After a while, she ran back with a bronze mirror and handed it to Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang took the bronze mirror and faced his face. When he saw the face on the bronze mirror, he couldn't come back to his senses for a long time. Inside the bronze mirror, it was actually a handsome young man. Thick black eyebrows, high nose bridge, full lips, smooth and delicate skin. His pitch-black eyes were like two black gems, extremely spirited. This, Qin Feiyang's face was dull. Wasn't this his face when he was young? Why was it like this? He looked at Qin Yu and Qin Shi and said, Sister Yu, is this the Imperial Palace?" "Of course it's the Imperial Palace. Your Highness, why do you ask?" The two women were surprised. Qin Feiyang said, "Then tell me, why am I here?" Qin Yu said, "Your Highness, this is your bedroom. Where else would you be if not here?" She looked at Qin Feiyang with concern and asked, "Your Highness, did you lose your memory?" "Lost my memory?" Qin Feiyang frowned. Qin Yu comforted him. "Your Highness, don't worry. We will inform the imperial physician to examine you." "Wait." Qin Feiyang hurriedly stopped the two women. Everything that was happening now was too strange. It was best not to make a fuss about it before figuring it out. "Your Highness, if you're sick, you have to treat it. That's right. If anything happens to you, the Emperor and Empress won't let us off easily." The two women said anxiously, "Emperor, Empress." Qin Feiyang's eyes trembled. Waves rose in his heart again, but he quickly regained his calm. He looked at the two women and said helplessly, "I'm not sick. What's there to treat?" But the two girls still wanted to say something. Qin Feiyang waved his hand and said, all right. If there is an accident, I will take responsibility for it. I won't implicate you. Now tell me, how did I fall unconscious and how long was I unconscious? You don't even remember this. Your Highness must have lost your memory. No, I have to tell the Emperor and Empress. Qin Shi, take good care of His Highness. After Qin Yu finished speaking, she ran outside. Stop. Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows and said angrily, if you continue like this, I will get angry. Qin Yu's delicate body trembled. She turned and walked to the bed. She looked a little flustered and said, This servant knows her mistake. Please forgive me, Your Highness. Qin Feiyang said, Speak. Yes. 3 days ago, Your Highness and the Crown Prince were fighting in the martial arts field. In the end, the Crown Prince lost and injured Your Highness. You have been unconscious until now. Qin Yu said. Crown Prince? Qin Feiyang was stunned. Naturally, he knew who the first prince was. He was his elder brother from a different mother. However, his relationship with this brother wasn't very good. According to the precedent of the Great Qin Empire, usually the eldest son of the empire would take over the throne. If there was no accident, his eldest brother would be the next emperor. However, an accident happened to him. Because of his amazing talent, the current emperor already had the idea of making him the crown prince. And this matter was basically known to everyone in the imperial palace. The crown prince naturally knew, so he often played some tricks behind his back. But the problem was that 3 days ago he was clearly in the 9 Nether Yellow Springs. How could he have fought with the crown prince in the imperial palace's martial arts field? No. Suddenly, a cold light flashed in Qin Feiyang's eyes. He remembered. That year, before he was expelled from the imperial capital, he did have a conflict with the crown prince and did have a fight in the martial arts field. Later on, he was indeed knocked unconscious by the crown prince. However, the crown prince didn't lose because he lost, but because he was deliberately ruthless. However, he remembered that he woke up the next morning, and not long after he woke up, his bad luck came. His cultivation was crippled, and he was expelled from the imperial palace. But now Qin Yu told him that he was unconscious for 3 days? What was going on? Could it be that in Iron Ox Town, Black Bear City, Yen City, the Sea of Despair, the Land of Ruins, the Forgotten Land, the state capital, the 9 Nether Yellow Springs, everything was just a dream in these 3 days? Could it be that being expelled from the imperial capital and having his cultivation crippled was also just a dream? But more than 10 years of time, more than 10 years of struggle, more than 10 years of hard work, the result was just a dream. Qin Feiyang couldn't accept it. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as he thought of the ancient castle. Fatso and the others were in the ancient castle at this moment. As long as they were still there, it could prove that what happened and the people he met in the past 10 years were not a dream. His mind moved. But in the end, he didn't enter the ancient castle and was still sitting on the bed. Qin Feiyang was surprised and carefully sensed the ancient castle. But he was shocked to find that he couldn't sense the existence of the ancient castle. The ancient castle was gone? This is impossible. Qin Feiyang shook his head forcefully. Then he circulated the battle character formula and the return character formula. However, the 2 great divine arts did not appear. I don't believe that what happened in the past 10 years was just a dream. Qin Feiyang roared in his heart as he looked inside his Qi Sea. However, he was shocked to find that his Qi Sea had not been opened yet, and what was flowing in his body was true Qi. Boom! His body shook, and a burst of aura broke out of his body. However, this aura was simply weak to the extreme. Qin Feiyang discovered that his current cultivation was actually only a 9-star martial master. It can't be. I'm clearly a 1-star war master. How could I be a 9-star martial master? Qin Feiyang muttered, his face full of disbelief. Qin Yu and Qin, she looked at each other. How could a 10-year-old youth break through to the 1-star war master? Could it be that His Highness's mind was in a mess? It seemed that the situation was very serious. His Highness, the first prince, has arrived. At this moment, a sharp and ear-piercing voice sounded from outside the hall. Qin Feiyang frowned. At the same time, Qin Yu and Qin, she's expressions changed, and they hurriedly ran out, stood at the door, and respectfully greeted. This servant greets His Highness, the first prince. In front of the hall was a huge garden. On a winding path, a young man wearing a golden crown and a golden robe was striding towards them. This person was about 175 meters tall and was about 18 or 19 years old. He swaggered as he walked, and his expression was full of arrogance. This person was Qin Fei Yang's elder brother, the current first prince of the empire. There was also a eunuch following behind the first prince with a flattering smile. Behind the two of them, there were 4 guards in golden armor, exuding a terrifying aura. The first prince walked to the door of the hall, looked at Qin Yu and Qin Shi, and said, "Is my 14th brother awake?" "The 14th prince has just woken up, and his body is still very weak. Your Highness, the first prince, if there's anything, can we talk about it later?" Qin Yu lowered her head and said respectfully, with a trace of worry in her eyes, "Awake?" The first prince was stunned, and his face suddenly sank. He said angrily, "What do you mean? This prince is his biological elder brother. How could I possibly harm him?" Qin Yu's body trembled, and she hurriedly knelt on the ground and said in horror, "This servant didn't mean to offend your Highness. Please forgive me. A lowly servant dares to block my way. You really don't know what's good for you. Scram!" The first prince shouted, his eyes full of contempt. Qin Yu didn't move, still kneeling there, and said anxiously, "Your Highness, the first prince, the 14th prince is weak now. He really can't be disturbed. How dare you block my way? You're courting death!" The first prince's face became extremely gloomy, and he shouted, "Drag them to feed the dogs!" The 4 guards immediately stepped forward, grabbed Qin Yu and Qin Shi, and prepared to drag them away. "Let's see who dares to touch them." At this time, a cold voice sounded in the palace. Following closely, Qin Feiyang was draped in a golden cloak, and he slowly walked out. "Greetings to your Highness, the 14th prince." The eunuch and the 4 guards brought by the first prince immediately knelt on the ground and saluted respectfully. At the same time, the first prince also looked at Qin Feiyang, as if he was observing something. Qin Feiyang ignored him, walked to the door, looked at Qin Yu and Qin Shi, and said, "Get up!" "Yes." The 2 women looked at the first prince in fear, then stood up and respectfully stood behind Qin Feiyang. Looking at Qin Feiyang's back, they suddenly had an illusion that the 14th prince now seemed to be a little different from before. It seemed that there was a kind of calmness and sharpness. Qin Feiyang looked at the first prince and said lightly, "What's the matter?" The first prince smiled and said, "14th brother, the wind is strong outside. You just woke up. If you catch a cold, father will definitely blame me. Let's go inside and talk." Qin Feiyang said, "My place is too small to accommodate a big Buddha like you. If you have something to say, say it here." The first prince's face stiffened, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He smiled and said, "Actually, it's nothing. I'm just here to check on your injuries." Qin Feiyang's lips curled into a mocking smile as he said, "Would you be so kind-hearted?" 14th brother, whether you believe it or not, 3 days ago I really made a mistake. I sincerely apologize to you, 14th brother. I hope you won't hold a grudge." The first prince cupped his hands, his face full of sincerity. Qin Feiyang said, "Let bygones be bygones. Moreover, I was not as skilled as others. I can't blame you. Now that you say so, I can finally breathe a sigh of relief. All right, take care of your injuries. I still have something to do, so I won't disturb you." The first prince smiled. "I won't see you out," Qin Feiyang said. The first prince smiled, flicked his sleeves, and left with the eunuch and the 4 guards. Qin Yu whispered, "Your Highness, you have to be careful. The first prince will not give up so easily." Qin Shi nodded and said, "That's right. He said that he was concerned about you this time, but he actually wanted to see if you were dead." "I know. Only if I'm dead will I not be a threat to his position." Qin Feiyang smiled coldly. Then he looked at the 2 girls and said, "You 2 go ahead. I want to sit alone for a while." "Yes." The 2 girls replied respectfully and turned to leave. Chapter 642. In the garden there were green grass, delicate flowers, a clear stream, and exquisite rockery. Qin Feiyong walked down a winding path slowly. Looking at the familiar surroundings, his eyes were filled with confusion. He, who had always been calm, was in a mess at that moment. He really did not know how to judge whether all of this was a dream or reality. Unknowingly, he walked onto a small bridge. Under the bridge, there was a stream. The water was clear as a mirror and fish swam back and forth. Qin Feiyong stood by the bridge and looked at the reflection on the water. He felt helpless. In the past, he never asked for help easily, but now he really wanted someone to give him some pointers. After a long time, he retracted his gaze and looked at a pavilion beside the small bridge. His eyes were filled with reminiscence. When he was young, he often sat in the pavilion to read, practice calligraphy, and read all kinds of historical records. He remembered that once he found a very interesting book. At that time, he was in the pavilion and read it for 3 days and 3 nights until he finished reading it. Because of this, the emperor and empress even scolded him severely. They said that he did not cherish his body and that he was too insensible. How could he read like that? Although they said that they scolded him, they were actually concerned. Since then, his mother had come here every day to accompany him in his studies and cultivation. His mother's doting eyes and kind face were still vivid in his mind. This place brought him a lot of joy. However, this was also the place he hated the most, because that was where the upheaval had occurred. He clearly remembered that the day of the accident was a cloudy and rainy day. He was sitting in the pavilion reading a book when someone suddenly came and forced him to take the calamity spirit pill without saying a word. At that time, he was in despair. He roared. He did not know what he had done wrong to deserve such a punishment, but no one gave him an explanation. Those familiar faces seemed so unfamiliar and cold in his eyes. At that time, he had just turned 10 years old. He was just an innocent child. Why did they treat him so cruelly? For more than 10 years, he had been thinking about revenge every moment. But now, he was told that all of this was just a dream. How could he accept it? Was the dream so realistic? Every detail, every character was clearly imprinted in his mind. Seriously, he would rather believe that everything he saw was a dream. However, Qin Yuan Qin, she said that he had been in a coma for 3 days. The first prince had also said that he had been unconscious for 3 days and had even come over to show concern for him. These were also very realistic. Suddenly, he shuddered and thought of a few things that could prove that this was not a dream. One of them was the Cosmo sack. The ancient castle could disappear, but the Qianquan bag had always been on his waist, so it was impossible for it to disappear. The things inside could not be changed. He hurriedly took out his Qianquan bag and immersed his consciousness into it. However, he was dumbfounded on the spot. Chang shui, ribs, and various medicinal herbs and pills had all disappeared. Instead, they were replaced by large amounts of gold coins, martial skills, and historical records. These were the things he had before he left the imperial capital. I don't believe it, he muttered to himself as he pulled open his shirt and looked down. Immediately, his arms drooped powerlessly as he stared blankly at the stream. His entire being was in a daze. The concentric, knot, and potential imprint on his chest were also gone. Could it be that what happened in the past 10 years was really a dream? Qin Feiyong murmured, because only when he woke up from the dream would everything disappear. Your Highness. At this time, Qin Yu trotted over. When she ran to Qin Feiyong's side, she did not see Qin Feiyong respond to her. She could not help but ask with concern, Your Highness, what's wrong with you? Qin Feiyong was stunned. He turned his head to look at Qin Yu. Looking at Qin Yu's concerned eyes, he slightly adjusted his mood and smiled. Sister Yu, are you looking for me for something? Sure. Qin Yu's face changed as she hurriedly gestured for him to keep quiet. She whispered, The Empress is here. Don't call me that anymore. If she hears it, even if I don't die, I will lose a layer of skin. Mother. Qin Feiyang's eyes trembled. For more than 10 years, he had been missing his mother all the time. But at this moment, when he really wanted to see his mother, he was a little hesitant. In the 3 days when you were unconscious, the Empress came more than 10 times. Every time she came, she washed her face with tears. Your Highness, when you see her later, you must not be naughty again. Qin Yu whispered. Naughty? Qin Feiyang was stunned. He was an adult now. How could he still be naughty? But then he was stunned again. A wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He had completely forgotten that he was only a 10-year-old boy. 10 years old was originally a naughty age. What's more, he was indeed quite naughty in the past. It was only because of that incident that he became mature and steady. Qin Yu looked at Qin Feiyang suspiciously and asked, Your Highness, did you hear what I said? Yes. Qin Feiyang nodded and asked, Where is Mother now? Qin Yu said, Your Highness, in your bedroom. Qin Feiyang looked up at the palace located in front of the garden. After a long silence, he retracted his gaze and then looked at Qin Yu with a faint smile. Sister Yu, you go ahead. I will go there myself. Okay. Qin Yu responded respectfully and turned to leave. Qin Feiyang did not immediately go there. Although he was eager to see his mother, he was not prepared at all. He did not know what to say when they met. Standing by the bridge, he was silent for a long time. Phew! In the end, he let out a long breath and turned to walk toward the palace. He must see his mother, because there were many mysteries that he could find the answers to from his mother. A moment later, he came to the gate of the palace. In front of the palace, there were 2 more guards. Both of them were middle-aged, tall and burly, wearing purple gold armor. Their eyes were incomparably sharp, and the aura they exuded was as unfathomable as the ocean. Qin Feiyang was very familiar with the 2 of them. They were the guards by his mother's side. However, he was not very clear about their cultivation. But according to his mother, the 2 of them were existences that surpassed the War Master. Greetings, Your Highness. Seeing Qin Feiyang walk over, the 2 of them immediately bowed. Uncles, there's no need to be so polite. Qin Feiyang laughed. As the guards by his mother's side, they were naturally very good to him, the prince. Sometimes they would even help him suppress the first prince and the others. Therefore, Qin Feiyang had always respected these 2 people. Your Highness, you're awake. We can finally breathe a sigh of relief. The Empress has been waiting for you in the side hall for a long time. Quickly go in. The 2 of them laughed, and there was a trace of doting between their brows. Qin Feiyang nodded and turned to walk towards the door. Looking at Qin Feiyang's back, the man on the left had a trace of suspicion in his eyes as he sent a sound transmission. Old friend, did you notice that His Highness seems a little different now? Different? The man on the right carefully sized up Qin Feiyang and thought to himself, now that you mention it, he really is a little different. Especially his temperament now. It's like he's a completely different person from before. He gives me the feeling that he's a scheming old fox. The man on the left narrowed his eyes and said angrily, How dare you call His Highness an old fox? The man on the right was startled and hurriedly said, Sorry, it was a slip of the tongue. What I meant was that His Highness is more mature than before. The man on the left rolled his eyes and said, You must pay attention to what you say in the future. Even though we have a good relationship with His Highness, we can't act without propriety. Yes, I'll pay attention. The man on the right nodded repeatedly, back to Qin Feiyang. When he reached the threshold of the door, he sensed a familiar aura. He would never forget this aura for the rest of his life. It was his mother, the Empress. The Emperor intended to make him the crown prince. His talent was only one of the reasons, and the other was because of his mother. This was because the Empress had supreme authority in the great Qin Empire. It was even to the extent that because of certain reasons, even the emperor had to be courteous to his mother. Even the emperor was like this, let alone the various dukes in the imperial capital. In front of his mother, these dukes who held great authority didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Who? Qin Feiyang took a deep breath and slightly eased the nervousness in his heart. He walked into the main hall and went straight to the door of the side hall. Immediately, a graceful and luxurious, beautiful woman entered his line of sight. The beautiful woman wore a crimson gold phoenix crown on her head and a golden dress with a lifelike phoenix pattern embroidered on it. A light golden cloud belt was tied around her waist, and she emitted a sacred aura that couldn't be profaned. Her appearance and skin were like that of a young girl, sparkling and translucent without the slightest flaw. No matter where she was a dazzling star and extremely eye-catching. However, at this moment, the beautiful woman was walking back and forth in the side hall, seeming to be rather anxious. Qin Feiyang's eyes couldn't help but moisten. This was the mother that he had been longing for so much. He finally saw her. His mother was still the same as before. There was no change at all. Mother. Qin Feiyang opened his mouth and shouted, somewhat choked with sobs. Tiana. Hearing Qin Feiyang's voice, the beautiful woman's body trembled and hurriedly turned to look at the door. Seeing Qin Feiyang standing outside the door, the beautiful woman hurriedly stepped forward and said angrily, running around as soon as you wake up, can't you make me less worried? At the same time, Qin Feiyang's eyes also trembled. Tiana? He hadn't heard this name for a long time, and he had almost forgotten it, because his original name had the word Tian in it. So his mother had always called him Ti. I'm sorry to make mother worry. Qin Feiyang lowered his head and said. Tears uncontrollably flowed out of his eyes and dripped to the ground, splashing water. What's wrong? I only said a few words and you feel wronged? The beautiful woman glared at Qin Feiyang angrily, then squatted on the ground and hugged Qin Feiyang in her arms, saying, Tian, our mother is not blaming you. Mother is afraid, you know? Seeing you in a coma these days, mother is afraid of losing you. Hearing this, Qin Feiyang's tears flowed even more fiercely. Okay, you're already so old and still crying. If others see you, they will definitely laugh at you behind your back. The beautiful woman rubbed Qin Feiyang's head and smiled dotingly. Qin Feiyang shook his head and said, I'm not afraid of being laughed at. Mother, let me hold you a little longer, okay? Okay. The beautiful woman nodded, looking a little helpless. Entering his mother's arms again and smelling her familiar scent again, Qin Feiyang was obsessed and his heart melted. He didn't want to get up again. If this was a dream, he didn't want to wake up. He would rather stay in the dream forever than leave his mother. However, the beautiful woman didn't think so much. She only thought that Qin Feiyang was still a little scared after surviving a disaster. So she softly comforted Qin Feiyang. After a long time, Qin Feiyang got up, wiped the tears from the corner of his eyes, and looked at the beautiful woman with a silly smile. Mother, it's so good to see you. Silly child, Mother is here every day. If you want to see Mother in the future, you can come and find me at any time. The beautiful woman said with a smile while holding Qin Feiyang's hand and walking to the seat next to them. When the beautiful woman sat down, she smiled and said, Tian, come and sit on Mother's lap. Okay. Qin Feiyang nodded happily. A 10-year-old child sitting on his mother's lap was a very normal thing. The beautiful woman hugged Qin Feiyang and said, Tian, although your talent is good, you're still young. Try not to provoke your big brother in the future. Qin Feiyang nodded. I know. With my strength, I'm still not his opponent. It's good that you know. Although Mother is the Empress, I can't punish your big brother because of this. However, I've already mentioned this to your father. He must be strictly disciplined. The beautiful woman said, Thank you, Mother. Let's not talk about big brother. Mother, I have a question to ask you. Qin Feiyang said, What question? The beautiful woman smiled and asked. Qin Feiyang said, Do you have a dagger called Chang Shui? The beautiful woman was stunned, her face full of suspicion. You don't? Qin Feiyang couldn't help but feel disappointed. After pondering for a while, he said, Then I'll ask you about another person, Qin Yuan. Although he had been with Uncle Yuan for so many years, Qin Feiyang still didn't know Uncle Yuan's true identity. He only remembered that when he was expelled from the imperial capital, he was in a coma. When he woke up, Uncle Yuan was already by his side, saying that he was ordered by his mother to take care of him. He also asked, but Uncle Yuan always used some unimportant things to brush him off. Qin Yuan, is there such a person in our Qin clan? Where did you hear about it? The beautiful woman was puzzled. In a dream, Qin Feiyang blurted out without hesitation. Subconsciously, he had already regarded those more than 10 years of experience as a dream. The beautiful woman was stunned. In the end, she burst out laughing and scolded. Silly child, how can you take the things in a dream seriously? Yes, things in a dream can't be taken seriously. Qin Feiyang nodded. There was no Uncle Yuan, no Chang Shui, and no castle. There was nothing here. If it wasn't a dream, what was it? Qin Feiyang completely believed that everything in front of him was real. He smiled and said, Mother, where is father now? The beautiful woman said, He's dealing with business. Don't disturb him. When he's done, he'll naturally come to see you. Qin Feiyang said a no. The beautiful woman stood up, rubbed Qin Feiyang's head, and said with a smile, Do you want to eat anything? Tell Mother. Mother will personally cook for you today. Anything is fine. Qin Feiyang showed a silly smile. The beautiful woman was stunned and nodded. Okay, then you rest here first. When the food is ready, Mother will send someone to call you. No, I want to go with Mother. I also want to personally cook a few dishes to show filial piety to Mother. Qin Feiyang said very seriously. The beautiful woman looked at Qin Feiyang in surprise. This child had never done this kind of thing before. Why was he so strange today? Mother, why are you in a daze? Let's go. Qin Feiyang dragged the beautiful woman and ran outside. Your body hasn't recovered yet. Why are you walking so fast? Walk slowly. Mother, your son's body is very strong. It's okay. In this way, Qin Feiyang and the beautiful woman walked outside, talking and laughing. But not long after they left the hall, a soft sigh sounded in the hall. Following that, a vague black shadow appeared out of thin air. He's trapped in the illusion, but doesn't realize it. This child has been completely addicted. But it's good. Let him enjoy the long-lost motherly love in this illusion. It can also satisfy his wish. Chapter 643. The appearance of the black shadow was like a flash in the pan, and it soon disappeared without a trace. The imperial kitchen. At this moment, all the imperial chefs and palace maids were standing outside the door, looking at the mother and son who were busy inside in surprise. What was going on today? The empress, who had always been high above the masses, and the emperor's favorite prince, actually came to cook in person? Besides, the two masters had always stretched out their hands for clothes and opened their mouths for food. How could they make delicious food? But the result shocked them. Not long after, a mouth-watering aroma of rice wafted out from the imperial kitchen. This is impossible. All the imperial chefs were dumbfounded. When did the empress and the prince learn how to cook? Why didn't they hear about it? Actually, the person who cooked was Qin Feiyang. In the past, he did not know how to cook in the imperial capital. But since he was stranded in Iron Ox Town, he had to learn these basic life skills in order to survive. However, the Celestial Empress was completely clueless about the kitchen. At first, she thought that cooking was very simple, so she said that she would cook for Qin Feiyang. But as soon as she entered the kitchen, She immediately realized that she was too naive, because, looking at the pots and pans in front of her, she did not know where to start and where to start. Seeing his mother's embarrassed expression, Qin Feiyang couldn't help but laugh. In the end, the Empress had no choice but to compromise and help Qin Feiyang. Although the kitchen was filled with oil and smoke, Qin Feiyang enjoyed this feeling very much. When there was sweat on his mother's forehead, he would help her wipe it off immediately. Gradually, the Empress also realized that this child seemed to be a little different from before. He was more considerate and mature than before. She even felt that in front of Qin Feiyang, she was more like a child who was taken care of. But she also liked the current Qin Feiyang very much. He was very serious and made people feel very grounded. The Empress asked curiously, "Tian, did you also learn this in your dream?" At this moment, Qin Feiyang was holding a big wok, and as he stir-fried, he laughed. "Yes, in my dream I learned a lot of things, and when I woke up from my dream, I had already broken through to 1-star Worm Master." The Empress smiled. "It seems that these 3 days, you had a very long dream." "Yes. In the dream, more than 10 years have passed. I remember every detail clearly, so when I woke up I couldn't tell which one was a dream, which was the real world." Qin Feiyang shook his head and smiled. Celestial Empress came to a realization and said, "No wonder you would ask so many strange questions in the side hall." Qin Feiyang smiled and stretched out his hand. "Mother, give your child a plate." Celestial Empress grabbed a prepared jade plate and handed it to Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang took the jade plate and quickly put the vegetables in the pot into the jade plate. Then he turned off the fire and walked to the dining table and put it on the table. There were 5 dishes, 1 soup, and 2 bowls of rice on the table. Although it wasn't perfect in terms of appearance, fragrance, and taste, it could still arouse one's appetite. Qin Feiyang swallowed his saliva and turned to look at his mother. He smiled and said, "It's all healed, my gentle and kind mother. Please enjoy." All right. Empress nodded and walked to the table with a smile. She picked up the jade chopsticks and put a piece of vegetable into her mouth. She nodded and praised, "Not bad, Tia." Being praised like this, Qin Feiyang scratched his head in embarrassment and said, "If mother likes it, this child will make it for you every day." Celestial Empress smiled and said, "Looks like mother will be in for a treat in the future. Is it really that delicious? Let me have a taste." But at this moment, a voice full of energy rang out. Following closely, a golden figure appeared in front of the table out of thin air. Immediately, Qin Feiyang's gaze trembled. The person who came was a middle-aged man with a golden dragon crown on his head and a golden dragon robe on his body. His eyebrows were sharp like swords, and his entire body emitted a shocking aura of an emperor. Without a doubt, this person was the current supreme emperor of the Great Qin Empire. "Greetings, Your Majesty." As soon as the emperor arrived, the palace maids, guards, and imperial chefs outside knelt down and kowtowed. "Greetings, Your Majesty." Celestial Empress also stood up and bowed. The emperor smiled and said, "We're all family here. There's no need to be so polite." With that, the emperor looked at the crowd outside and said, "All of you, stand up too." Yes, everyone stood up and stood respectfully in front of the door, not daring to even breathe loudly. Celestial Empress was puzzled. "Aren't you dealing with matters? Why are you suddenly here? My precious son is awake. Of course I have to come and see him." The emperor looked at Qin Feiyang dotingly, but found that Qin Feiyang was looking at him with a trace of fear in his eyes. "Tiana, what's wrong? Could it be that after being unconscious for a few days, you can't even recognize your father?" The emperor scolded with a smile. Celestial Empress also looked at Qin Feiyang strangely. Qin Feiyang quivered and came back to his senses. He bowed and said, "Greetings, father." That disaster was just a dream. The father in front of him was still the father who doted on him. Everything was in the past. There was no need to think so much. The emperor was stunned and patted Qin Feiyang's head in annoyance. He scolded, "Brat, why are you so reserved all of a sudden? This is not like you." Qin Feiyang smiled and said, "People will grow up." Ah, the emperor was stunned and asked with a strange expression, "So you've grown up?" "Just a little more mature than before." Qin Feiyang chuckled. "Come on. Do you think I don't know what kind of person you are? Stop putting on an act in front of your father." The emperor rolled his eyes and looked at the dishes on the table. He said in surprise, "You made all these?" "Yes. Father, have a taste too." Qin Feiyang was like a child who was asking for praise. He quickly took a pair of chopsticks and handed it to the emperor. The emperor smiled and said, "Of course I have to try the food made by my precious son, but there is a condition. If it doesn't taste good, I will punish you." Qin Feiyang asked, "If it's delicious, then shouldn't I be rewarded?" The emperor's face twitched. He turned to look at Celestial Empress and said, see, just now he said he was mature, and now he is taking the opportunity to blackmail his father. Alas, how did I give birth to such a white-eyed wolf?" The emperor shook his head with a sad face. White-eyed wolf. Qin Feiyang's body trembled. The emperor's unintentional words awakened his memory. Wolf King, going through life and death with the white-eyed wolf, fighting side by side for more than 10 years. He had long been an inseparable family member, but he didn't expect that it was just a dream. But when the emperor saw this, he thought that Qin Feiyang was angry. He smiled apologetically and said, Father was just joking. Be good, don't be angry. Father will apologize to you, okay?" As the emperor of the empire, he could actually put down his attitude and apologize to his child. It could be seen how much the emperor doted on Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang was speechless. Am I such a petty person? I just thought of a wolf in my dream. Dream? The emperor was stunned. Celestial Empress smiled and said, "These 3 days Tian had a very long dream. He even said that in his dream he had already broken through to War Master." Ugh! The emperor was stunned, then shook his head and said, "What a silly boy! But with your talent, not to mention War Master, even surpassing Father is not impossible, as long as you are willing to work hard." "I will work hard." Qin Feiyang nodded solemnly. If it was in the past, he wouldn't have thought so much, but it was different now. No matter what identity or background one had, without strength, everything was in vain. The emperor looked at Qin Feiyang seriously and nodded. "Yes, you are indeed much more mature than before. All right, let's not talk about it anymore. Let's have a good meal as a family." The family of 3 sat around the dining table, chatting and laughing. It was a happy and harmonious atmosphere. Qin Feiyang looked at his mother and then at his father, a happy smile on his face. This was the life he wanted. Happy times always pass quickly. After the meal, the emperor went to deal with business again. Celestial Empress accompanied Qin Feiyang back to his bedroom, gave him a few words of advice, and then turned to leave. Qin Feiyang seemed to have suddenly made a decision and shouted, "Mother, wait!" Celestial Empress stopped, turned around, and asked with a smile, "What's wrong?" Qin Feiyang said, "Mother, I want to go to the spiritual state to take a look." "Spiritual state?" Celestial Empress frowned. Qin Feiyang said in disappointment and frustration, "Although it was only a dream, I still wanted to take a look because there were too many people in the dream that I was worried about." Celestial Empress pondered for a moment and nodded with a smile. "All right, but I will only be reassured if your 2 uncles go with you." "Okay." Qin Feiyang nodded. Celestial Empress said, "Qin Zhong, Qin Yi, come in." The 2 burly men in purple and gold armor immediately walked into the hall. Celestial Empress said, "Accompany Tian to the spiritual state. Remember to protect Tian If anything happens to him, you know the consequences." "Yes, we swear to protect His Highness with our lives." The 2 knelt on one knee and said respectfully, Celestial Empress nodded and looked at Qin Feiyang with a smile. You decide when to go. I have other things to do. Qin Feiyang bowed and said, Mother, take care. Farewell, Celestial Empress. After seeing off Celestial Empress respectfully, Qin Zhong and Qin Yi stood up and looked at Qin Feiyang with a sly smile on their faces. Qin Yi moved closer to Qin Feiyang and chuckled. Your Highness, what's so fun about the spiritual state? Uncle will take you to a more fun place. Where? Qin Feiyang was puzzled. Qin Yi glanced at the door and saw no one, so he whispered, Fragrant Moon Brothel. Qin Feiyang was stunned. He smiled bitterly and said helplessly, Uncle Qin Yi, I'm still a child. Fragrant Moon Brothel was the most famous restaurant in the imperial capital. More importantly, it was a brothel. You're 10 years old. You're still young? Go and see those nobles and marquises. They fool around there every day. Even your brothers, including the eldest prince, sneak there every now and then to have fun. Your Highness, it's not that I want to criticize you, but all you do is cultivate and read books. It's too boring. It's life. You should live it splendidly and learn to enjoy it. The two instigated. Qin Feiyang was amused. It seems that you too are regulars there too. Qin Zhong's expression changed as he hurriedly said, Your Highness, you can't say that. If your mother finds out, we'll both be finished. Qin Feiyang smiled. Okay, I won't tell Mother. Let's go to the spiritual state first. As for Fragrant Moon Brothel, we'll talk about it when we come back. That's more like it. Let's go. I'll take you to the pagoda. Qin Yi said. Pagoda? Qin Feiyang frowned. Why hadn't he heard of this place? Qin Yi explained there are teleportation altars to the 9 states in the pagoda. However, no one knows about this except for the Emperor, Empress, and us guards. Qin Zhong added, especially you princes. Once you know, you'll definitely run around. Qin Feiyang was enlightened. In the dream, when he was expelled from the imperial capital, he was in a coma. When he woke up, he was already in the spiritual state. He didn't know how he got to the spiritual state at that time. However, he had been guessing that it was Uncle Yuan who brought him there. Swoosh! Qin Zhong waved his hand and swept Qin Feiyang out of the hall. Soon, they left the halls and entered a deep mountain. Where is this? Qin Feiyang scanned his surroundings, his eyes full of suspicion. In this place, the mountains were undulating. Ancient trees towered into the sky, and powerful, ferocious birds spread their wings and soared between heaven and earth. There were also all kinds of ferocious beasts lurking in the forest, and their auras were extremely terrifying. Back Mountain. Qin Yi said, What? Qin Feiyang was shocked. Speaking of the Back Mountain, one had to talk about the Imperial Palace first. The Imperial Palace covered an extremely large area. It was no exaggeration to say that even Battle Faction had to fly for a few days to cross the north and south. There were many places that Qin Feiyang had never been to. Among them was the Back Mountain. Of course, it wasn't that he didn't want to come, but that he couldn't. In the Imperial Palace, the Back Mountain was considered a forbidden area. Without the permission of the Emperor and Empress, no one could set foot in it. The princes were no exception. Therefore, all along, this place had been a mystery in Qin Feiyang's eyes. Chapter 644. On the peak of the mountain sat a huge ancient pagoda. The ancient pagoda was dark and exuded an ancient aura. On the front of the ancient pagoda, 2 bold words were engraved. Pagoda! In front of the pagoda, an old man sat cross-legged. This person was dressed in white, had white hair and a white beard, and exuded an otherworldly aura. Qin Feiyang looked at the old man and realized that he had never seen him before. Qin Yi bowed to the old man and said, Elder Qin, we are under the orders of the Empress to bring His Highness the 14th Prince to the spiritual state. Please open the pagoda door. The old man opened his eyes. They were not cloudy at all and were shining brightly. Glancing at Qin Yi and Qin Yi, the old man looked at Qin Feiyang, stood up, and cupped his hands. "Greetings, Your Highness." Qin Feiyang smiled. "Senior, you don't have to be so polite." Even Qin Yi and Qin Yi were so respectful. This old man was obviously not an ordinary person. "I've long heard that Your Highness is talented and outstanding. Now that I've seen you, you are indeed extraordinary." The old man smiled. Qin Feiyang was a little embarrassed and shook his head. "Senior, you flatter me. I really don't deserve it. Talented, but not arrogant. Successful, but not arrogant. You have a good temperament." The old man nodded with a smile, seemingly praising Qin Feiyang. Then he turned around and stretched out his old arm. Battle, qi gushed out of his index finger and merged into the pagoda door. Clang! Immediately, the pagoda door slowly opened, and a magnificent aura rushed out. The old man said, "The teleportation altar to the spiritual state is on the first level. Go in yourselves. Remember, don't run around." "Understood." Qin Yi and Qin Feiyang bowed and replied, then led Qin Feiyang into the pagoda. The pagoda door also closed. Qin Feiyang looked at everything in front of him curiously. The space here was about 100 meters wide. 9 blood-red altars were neatly arranged on the ground, all emitting an ancient and mysterious aura. Beside the 9 altars, there was a stone tablet with different words engraved on it. Spiritual state, cloud state, crane state, Yuzhou, Fengzhou, etc. Qin Feiyang followed Qin Yi and Qin Yu to the stone tablet with the spiritual state engraved on it. Qin Zhong said, "This altar leads to the spiritual state." Qin Feiyang asked doubtfully, "Is there an altar on the second floor as well?" This, Qin Zhong hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. "Your Highness, I really can't say that." "All right." Qin Feiyang shrugged helplessly. Qin Zhong smiled apologetically. Battle, qi, surged out and flowed into the altar. Boom! All of a sudden, the blood-colored altar shone brightly. Qin Yi grabbed Qin Feiyang's arm and stepped onto the altar, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. In the spiritual state, in the air above a mountain range outside the city, whoosh! 3 figures appeared out of thin air. They were Qin Feiyang and Qin Zhong. As soon as he appeared, Qin Yi used a trace of battle qi to support Qin Feiyang. Because Qin Feiyang couldn't fly yet, Qin Zhong glanced around and looked at the city not far away. He smiled and said, "That should be the city." Qin Feiyang lowered his head to take a look, and his expression froze. The appearance of the city was completely different from the city in his dream. It was extremely unfamiliar. After a long time, Qin Feiyang came back to his senses and said, "Uncle Qin Zhong, go and find out if there are these people in the city." "Who?" Qin Zhong asked. "Rin Wushuang, Lu Xingchen, Dong Zhengyang, Dong Fengwuhen, Murong Xiong, Shenmei, Shenlong, Jiangwei, Wang Hong, and a few big families, Lu family, Dong family, Xiao family, Xin family," Qin Feiyang said. "Okay, I'll go now." Qin Zhong nodded and disappeared in a flash. "Your Highness, have you been to the spiritual state?" Qin Yi looked at Qin Feiyang suspiciously. Seeing Qin Feiyang say the names without hesitation, he felt as if he lived here. Qin Feiyang said, "In my dream." "In your dream?" Qin Yi was slightly stunned. Then he shook his head, helplessly, and didn't say anything else. Swish! Soon, Qin Zhong returned. "How was it?" Qin Feiyang looked at him anxiously. Qin Zhong shook his head and said, "Your Highness, those people and those families you mentioned, none of them exist." "What?" Qin Feiyang's eyes trembled. He couldn't accept it. Qin Yi couldn't help but say, "Your Highness, allow me to say something. You can't take the things in your dreams seriously." Qin Feiyang said, Next place, Butterfly Valley. Where is Butterfly Valley? The two were suspicious. Although they knew about the spiritual state, they had never been here, so they weren't familiar with the various places in the spiritual state. Qin Feiyang said, "Just fly in the direction I point." Under Qin Feiyang's guidance, they soon arrived above Butterfly Valley. However, looking around, there was no valley, no butterflies, no ugly old woman, and no teleportation altar to the Forgotten Land. Qin Feiyang was in a daze. Could it be that none of the things in the dream were real? Qin Zhong and Qin Yi looked at each other, not knowing how to persuade him. A moment later, Qin Yi smiled and said, "Your Highness, where are we going next?" Since they couldn't persuade him, they would follow His Highness' wishes. Qin Feiyang came back to his senses and asked, "Do you know who the spiritual state's mansion master is?" "We don't know." The two shook their heads. Qin Feiyang frowned and said, "That's not right. The mansion masters of the 9 states go to the imperial capital every 10 years. How can you not know?" "There is indeed such a thing. But every time the emperor goes to the back mountain to meet them." "Why don't I ask the emperor?" Qin Zhong said. "Forget it. Father is busy every day. Don't disturb him for such trivial matters." Qin Feiyang shook his head, pondered for a moment, and said, "Next, let's go to Yen City." Above Yen City, swish, Qin Feiyang and the other two appeared out of thin air. Qin Zhong asked, "Who are you going to ask about this time?" Qin Feiyang said, "Ask about a person called Yen." However, his words came to an abrupt halt. Qin Zhong asked suspiciously, "Yen what?" "Yen what?" Qin Feiyang also asked himself in his heart. He clearly thought of a name before. Why did he suddenly forget it? What happened? Suddenly, he remembered again. He wanted to ask about Yan Nanshan. Go and ask if there is a person called Yan Nanshan and someone called Jiang. Speaking of this, Qin Feiyang's memory blurred again. He tried hard to recall for a moment and said, "Right, Jiang Jingyi." "Okay." Qin Zhong nodded and quickly rushed down. Qin Feiyang looked down at Yen City, his eyes full of confusion. Yan Nanshan and Jiang Jingyi were such familiar names. Why did it take him so long to remember? Alas! At this moment, a soft sigh came into Qin Feiyang's mind. "Who is it?" Qin Feiyang was shocked and looked around. "Your Highness, what's wrong?" Qin Yi also looked at Qin Feiyang in surprise. "Why is there no one?" Qin Feiyang frowned and shook his head. "Nothing. Maybe I'm hallucinating." But before his voice died away, a black shadow appeared out of thin air in front of him. Qin Feiyang looked at the black shadow with bewilderment. The black shadow's voice came into Qin Feiyang's mind again. "How long are you going to stay here? What do you mean?" Qin Feiyang frowned. "Your Highness, who are you talking to?" When Qin Yi heard Qin Feiyang speak again, the bewilderment in his eyes grew even stronger. He followed Qin Feiyang's gaze, but saw nothing. Qin Feiyang was stunned. He looked at Qin Yi and asked, "Didn't you see it? There's a black shadow there." "A black shadow?" Qin Yi looked again, but there was still nothing. The black shadow glanced at Qin Feiyang and said, "Here, only you can see me. No one else can see or hear what I say." "Why?" Qin Feiyang was surprised. The black shadow said, "Because this is an illusion. Everything in front of you is the manifestation of your obsession." Boom! As soon as he said this, Qin Feiyang's mind trembled. "Are you confused now? Why did you suddenly forget the names of Yan Nanshan and Jiang Jingyi?" The black shadow said again. Qin Feiyang nodded. "Let me tell you, if you don't recognize reality, not only will you forget Yan Nanshan and Jiang Jingyi, but you will also forget Wolf King and Fatso. Even what you have experienced in the past 10 years, the people and things you have met, will gradually fade in your mind. Until the end, you will completely forget." The black shadow said. "Why is it like this?" Qin Feiyang was surprised. Because the bridge of helplessness is a test of your willpower. If your willpower is not strong enough, you will be trapped in the illusion forever. When you've forgotten everyone and everything, that will be the time of your death. Child, I understand you. You yearn for family and a carefree Pure Land in your heart. You yearn for those painful things in the past to never happen. That's why I didn't remind you immediately. However, no matter how beautiful this place is, it is only fake. You can't continue like this. Otherwise, you will never be able to leave this illusion. Return to the imperial capital and see your real mother. Face it bravely. Don't lose your life because of your greed for a moment of beauty. That will only make you more regretful. The Black Shadow sighed. This is an illusion. Qin Feiyang scanned the sky, the earth, the mountains, and the rivers. There was still a trace of disbelief in his eyes. It was not easy for him to believe and accept all this, but now someone suddenly came out and told him that it was all fake. He could not accept such a change in his heart. The Black Shadow said, "You don't believe me?" Qin Feiyang roared, "I don't even know who you are. Why should I believe you? Is it important who I am?" The Black Shadow was puzzled. Qin Feiyang said angrily, "Of course it is important, because only when I know your identity can I judge whether this place is real or not. It seems that your obsession is deeper than I thought. But I won't blame you. If it were any other child back then, they would have broken down long ago. It's not easy for you to be strong enough to get to where you are today." The Black Shadow sighed deeply. "Since you know about that, then you should know how much I want to live now. Why do you have to disrupt it? Do you want to hear my heartfelt words? I really want to live here forever, even if everything here is fake." When Qin Feiyang finished speaking, he lowered his head with an incomparably desolate expression. "I understand, but have you thought about it? If you die in the illusion, what will happen to your mother in the imperial capital? If she knows that her favorite child died outside, how sad will she be? And Qin Yuan, he has told you countless times that no matter what difficulties you encounter, you must be strong and brave. If you give up here, can you live up to his expectations?" The Black Shadow roared. Qin Feiyang's body shook like a bolt from the blue. The Black Shadow sighed softly and said, "Child, wake up. For your mother, for your uncle, and for yourself." Qin Feiyang's face was full of pain. After a long time, he said, "What do I have to do to break this illusion?" The Black Shadow said, "The fetters in your heart are your parents. Only by destroying them will the illusion disappear, and with a thought they will be turned into ashes." "What?" Qin Feiyang suddenly looked up at the Black Shadow. Even if it was fake, he couldn't do it. The Black Shadow said, "This is the only way." Qin Feiyang clenched his hands so hard that his nails had sunk into his palms and blood was flowing. After a while, he loosened his hands and said, "Give me some time." The Black Shadow nodded and said, "Okay, but I have to remind you that you have at most an hour." "So short." Qin Feiyang's eyes trembled. An hour would pass in the blink of an eye. What could he do? "There's one more thing to tell you. Wolf King and Run Wushuang have also fallen into the illusion. You'd better save them quickly." The Black Shadow said again. "What?" Qin Feiyang's expression changed. The Black Shadow said, "But don't worry, their lives won't be in danger for the time being. Can't you say it all at once?" Qin Feiyang looked at him helplessly and breathed a sigh of relief. "There's a question I want to ask you." "What question?" the Black Shadow asked. "Since this place is an illusion created by my desire, why didn't the imperial capital change while the spiritual state changed? The ancient castle disappeared, and people like Uncle Yuan and Ren Wushuang didn't even show up?" Qin Feiyang frowned. The Black Shadow said, "Because the illusion wants you to believe that all of this is real." Qin Feiyang understood. All of this was to confuse his mind, because if everything in the illusion was the same as everything in reality, he would definitely be suspicious. So, the illusion removed everything that had happened in the past 10 years, leaving only the people and things in the imperial capital, and made him return to the time when he was 10 years old. In this way, he would believe that all of this was real, and then he would continue to fall into the illusion until he was doomed eternally. What a terrifying illusion! Qin Feiyang couldn't help but feel a chill down his spine. He looked at the black shadow and said, "One last question. Who are you? Why can you appear in my illusion? When the time is right, you will naturally know who I am." The black shadow said with a smile and instantly disappeared without a trace. The time is not right again. Qin Feiyang shook his head and smiled bitterly. He looked down at the ground below with a trace of disappointment in his eyes. "Your Highness, what's wrong with you? What illusion? What illusion? What Uncle Yuan? Who the hell are you talking to?" Qin Yi, on the other hand, was so anxious that he was about to explode. Qin Feiyang smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'm fine." Fine? You're tuning in to the Thunder Spear YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.